Hello, and welcome to this clean, historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now, get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. A Bride to Mend His Sorrow by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1. Wilmington, Delaware, 1876. Emma let herself into the modest rooms she shared with Rosalind, her ma, and quickly hung up her bonnet and shawl behind the door. "I managed to buy some oranges from the fruit seller at the market just as he was packing up, Ma," she called. She put her basket on the kitchen table and hurried through to Rosalind's small bedroom. She hadn't really wanted to leave her ma alone, but Rosalind had insisted that Emma should try and go about her day as if nothing was wrong. "You can have one after a bowl of beef broth. It should be nice and refreshing." Rosalind's bedroom was gloomy, as the small window only overlooked a narrow cobbled alleyway, so Emma tweaked the drapes apart to try and make the room brighter without resorting to turning the lamp up. As the weak evening light fell across Rosalind's bed, where she was dozing, Emma's heart sank. "Ma, I don't want to alarm you, but you've gotten worse since I went out." She perched on the edge of the lumpy mattress, and the bedstead creaked under her weight. "What can I do to help?" Emma gently placed her hand on Rosalind's brow and tried not to let her shock show. Rosalind had been battling with influenza for weeks, and they both thought she had turned a corner the day before, but now it had come back with a vengeance. Her skin felt hot and clammy under Emma's palm, and she quickly poured some water into the bowl on the washstand before dabbing a damp cloth on her forehead to try to cool her down. "It's no use. I just can't seem to shake this illness, Emma," Rosalind croaked. Her unfocused gaze roamed around the room, as though she was looking for answers before it came to rest on Emma again, and she smiled. "Have a sip of water, Ma. It shouldn't take long for the broth to warm up again, and there's a bit of bread left to go with it. Is your head aching? Perhaps I should go and fetch the doctor?" Rosalind shook her head and then winced as every muscle in her body felt as though she had been trampled by a runaway horse. "We don't have enough money left to fetch the doctor again," she said weakly. "I think it's time to accept the inevitable." She clasped one of Emma's hands to stop her from leaving. "Try not to be sad, my dear. We've had many happy times together, and if it's my time to go to the Lord, I'm not scared." Emma wanted to cry and rail against how unjust it felt to lose her ma this soon. She had only just turned 17, and after losing her pa when she was only 10 years old, the two of them had always been closer than most. Rosalind was everything Emma hoped to be as a grown woman, determined, kind-hearted to those less fortunate, and loving. She had often spoken longingly about looking forward to helping Emma raise a family of her own, but now it would never come to anything. "I'm sure I could scrape together a few coins. We can't just give up." She looked frantically around the room and made a mental tally of the meager belongings in their rooms, wondering whether there would be time to pawn something. The doctor had already accepted less money than his regular fee on his last 2 visits, but his assistant had made it clear it couldn't go on. And the pawnbroker had also turned his nose up at the last items she had brought in to sell. She was running out of options. She glimpsed her ma's sewing basket in the next room. It had belonged to Rosalind's mother before her, and she knew her ma would never want to let it go. Dressmaking and mending were what had supported them all these years since her pa had died after all. As though reading her thoughts, Rosalind's eyes fluttered open again. "Emma," she murmured, "you've looked after me so well while I've been sick. I know we always said that I would teach you how to become a dressmaker like me one day, but we've run out of time, my dear. I want you to have my sewing basket after I'm gone, so that you'll always have something to remember me by, and it will help put food on the table, even if it was never enough to cover all our costs." Emma stood up again and threw a lump of coal on the fire. It was the last one in the coal bucket, and she had no idea how she would keep her ma's room warm once the fire had gone out. She thought about her ma's last comment. wondering what she meant. Never enough to cover all our costs? As far as she knew, Rosalind's dressmaking skills had been all they'd had to pay the rent and put food on the table since her pa had died. Emma had started working at the garment factory at the end of the street a year ago to help make ends meet. But she'd had to hand in her notice when her ma became too sick to be left alone. She wanted to ask her ma what she meant, but Rosalind's eyes had closed again, and she started to creep away. She would heat the broth and hope that might help her feel a little better. "Emma, wait," Rosalind called her back into the room. "I don't think I have long. Before I get too ill to speak, will you please go to the ironworks and ask Mr. Butler to come?" "Mr. Butler? Are you sure?" Emma wondered whether her ma's mind was wandering from the fever. Irvin Butler owned Butler's Ironworks, where her pa used to work before he had died in an accident, knocked over by falling barrels off a drayman's cart at the ironworks entrance. "Yes, we're still in touch, and I need to ask him to do something for me." Rosalind's voice was growing fainter, and she tried to lift her head off the pillow. "Please, Emma, I don't think I have much longer on this earth, and it's important." "Thank you, Miss Jessup," Irvin Butler said as Emma took his hat and coat from him. He gave her a kindly smile and a small bow. She hesitated as she held his coat, wondering where the best place to hang such an expensive garment would be. It was likely worth more than she earned in a month. "On the back of the chair will be just fine," he continued. He smoothed his hair back, which was graying at the temples, and adjusted the wire-rimmed spectacles. His silver-topped cane tapped on the floor as he edged further into the room, and he gave her an expectant look. "I'm afraid our home doesn't have many comforts, but I can offer you a cup of tea or coffee if you would like one." Emma felt flustered at the thought of having such a grand guest visiting and tried not to see her surroundings through Mr. Butler's eyes. The threadbare armchairs on either side of the hearth, where the fire had almost gone out, and the wooden table and chairs, which were pocked with woodworm. A gentleman of his status would no doubt be accustomed to far more affluent surroundings. "No need for that, my dear. I can see your ma must be an excellent seamstress if those delightful samplers on the wall are anything to go by." He smiled again, giving no indication that he felt out of place in their run-down rooms in the poorest area of town, which she was grateful for. He seemed to be the sort of man who wasn't easily shocked and liked folks to feel at ease in his company. He had been surprised to see her when she had knocked politely on his office door at the ironworks, but as soon as she had explained that Rosalind was gravely ill and needed to see him, he had grabbed his greatcoat and hat and followed her without hesitation. "Mr. Butler is here, Ma," Emma said softly from the bedroom doorway. Every breath that Rosalind took rattled in her chest, and Emma had the sickening understanding that her ma did not have much longer to live. "Would you like me to sit with you both?" she asked. "No, I need to speak with Mr. Butler alone to start with," she replied hastily. Emma stood aside to let him in. Every moment was becoming stranger than the last, but then she was only 17 and ill-equipped to know what was normal when the person you loved more than anyone in the world was soon to pass. Her mind whirred with what they could possibly need to discuss. Something about her pa, perhaps? But it was 7 years since they had lost him. She sighed and riddled the coals in the fire with the poker, hoping they would last the night. Her ma had been so sure he would come at her request, which was another mystery. Mr. Butler seemed like a kind-hearted gentleman, but as far as she was aware, Rosalind had never even met the man. As she heard the rise and fall of their muffled voices from the bedroom, Emma picked up some mending to occupy herself. She threaded a needle and shook one of her old gowns out, pulling a face. It had already been mended so many times that there was scarcely any of the threadbare fabric left to secure a new patch to. She would need to plead with the owner of the second-hand clothes store to let her have one on the cheap, and try not to think of which poor soul's corpse it had last graced. The walls of the apartment were thin, and although she wasn't deliberately listening, a few words caught her attention. "I always promised I would do whatever I could to make up for Albert's death, Rosalind. I'm so worried about her. There are too many crooks and unscrupulous men in this part of town who would try to take advantage of her being alone." Just tell me what you would like me to do. I hadn't realized things had gotten so hard for you. You deserved better than this. My mind would be at peace if I knew you could offer her some sort of security. The conversation came in snatches as Rosalind struggled to speak, and Emma still couldn't really decipher what exactly was being arranged between the two of them. By the time it was almost dark, the bedroom door creaked open again, and Mr. Butler beckoned her in. He had drawn up a spare chair next to the bed, and he gestured for Emma to sit down on it before he sat down in the other chair next to her. In the soft lamplight, Rosalind's face was etched with pain, but there was a new sense of hope in her expression that Emma hadn't seen for a long time. "You look a little better, Ma. Talking with our guest has done some good." Rosalind nodded. "You might be wondering why I asked you to fetch Mr. Butler." She rested her frail fingers over Emma's hand and stroked it gently as though she wanted to remain connected to her daughter until the end. "Ever since your pa died, Irvin has very kindly paid our rent. He always felt partly responsible for your pa's accident, even though it wasn't his fault, because it happened outside the ironworks. So he did this to make life a little bit easier for me because he knew I had a young child to care for." Emma couldn't conceal her surprise, and she turned to look at Mr. Butler, who nodded in confirmation. "Is he going to offer to continue paying our rent, even if Ma is no longer alive?" The thought gave her a crumb of comfort. She knew she shouldn't be worrying about money when her Ma was close to death, but that was a luxury only wealthy folks had. Families like hers worried about money every day. Irvin is a very kind-hearted gentleman, which is why I have asked him whether he would consider marrying you, Emma, to give you some security after I'm gone. Marriage? Emma gasped. This was the last thing she had imagined her Ma would suggest. She shook her head slightly, wondering whether she had misheard, and snatched her hand away. Irvin Butler might be kind-hearted, but he was 3 times her age, almost 60 if he was a day. His gray hair was thinning, and she could not for one moment imagine being his wife. You can't expect me to marry like this, surely?" Emma gave Mr. Butler a direct look. Usually she would never have dared, but this was no time for politeness. I don't think Ma can be in her right mind to suggest such a thing," she stuttered. "It's not what you imagine," Mr. Butler said softly. "I lost my wife several years ago, and we don't have children. I'm not looking for a romantic relationship, but I do miss Ethel's company." A shadow of sadness crossed his eyes, but then he cleared his throat and continued. "Your mother wants someone to provide some security for you, and I would appreciate a companion to share my life with. I don't pretend to hope that you would find it in your heart to love me, Emma, but I can offer you a comfortable life away from all the hardships you have already suffered. I'm not some sort of monster, and your dear mother would feel happier knowing that you would be well taken care of." Emma was lost for words, and the silence in the room stretched between them, punctuated only by the sound of Rosalind's rasping gasps for air. She thought about how little she would earn if she returned to the garment factory. It wouldn't be enough to cover her rent and food, and she knew how easy it was for young women in her situation to fall prey to the predatory men in the slums, who would think nothing of ruining her reputation and then casting her aside. She had to face reality. She was about to become an impoverished, homeless young woman, all alone in the world. "Please, Emma, will you do this for me? I know the end has come, but I can't let go until I know you will be safe without me." Emma blinked back the tears that pricked the back of her eyes. She had always imagined marrying a man of her own age, someone who loved her, but now she realized it was probably just a fanciful dream. She would be more likely to end up out on the streets, settling for whatever scraps of affection came her way. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see that Mr. Butler was placidly waiting for her reply. She had heard from people in the neighborhood that he was a generous employer and forward-thinking when it came to labor laws. Surely someone like that would also be kind in the home? "Please, Emma, I think your pa would have approved, and you have to understand that I would never have gotten by all these years without Irvin's help. He has only ever had our best interests at heart." Mr. Butler quietly left the room, wanting to give the 2 women privacy in these last precious moments. and Emma thought once again that he seemed kind. She stood up and leaned over Rosalind, pressing a kiss to her feverish brow. She could see that life was already ebbing away by the opaqueness in her eyes. "If this is what you wish for me to do, Ma, then I will. I love you, and I would never want to do anything to hurt you." Rosalind gazed up at Emma and smiled with a soft sigh of relief, and then her eyelids slowly closed. Within 10 minutes, she had slipped away from her mortal life, leaving Emma promised to a man she had only just met. As silence filled the room, Emma bowed her head to give thanks for the years she and her ma had had together, and prayed that marriage to Irvin Butler would be the right decision. Chapter 2. Wilmington, Delaware, 1881. Emma tightened her shawl around her shoulders against the cold wind, which whistled through the flimsy fabric, making her shiver. Although spring was just around the corner, winter had been reluctant to release its grip on the town this year, and there were still pockets of dirty snow in the corners of the streets. She clutched a small bunch of fading blooms to her chest, which she had purchased for a few coins she could barely afford, and lowered her head as she rounded the final corner of the lane that led to the river. Her heart felt as leaden as the gray skies overhead. She approached the riverbank slowly and reluctantly. The spot where she was headed was renowned for being where lost souls who had given up on life would end their days in the icy clutches of the deep water, which swirled below. Sadly, her neighbor Fiona had been driven to commit the tragic act herself a few days earlier, when she could no longer see her way out of the poverty and destitution that had blighted her days. Emma paused for a moment on the riverbank and then threw the flowers out into the water. "I pray that you will find peace in the arms of the Lord now, Fiona," she murmured. The current snatched the flowers away, and they were sucked beneath the dark, swirling surface within seconds. She felt tears pricking the back of her eyes as she stood there in the buffeting wind and hastily blinked them away. But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept returning to how much her life had changed, then changed again, during the 5 years that had passed so quickly since that fateful night when her ma had asked Irvin to marry her. In the privacy of her bedroom on her wedding morning, Emma had cried at the thought of being married to a man 3 times her age. But Irvin had taught her a valuable lesson, which was not to judge people by first impressions. Emma quickly discovered that Irvin Butler was a kind-hearted, thoughtful man. He treated her with respect and like an equal, telling her often that he valued her opinion and enjoyed her company. As he had promised, their relationship was not a romance in the traditional sense. Rather, she felt as though he saw her more like a daughter, the one he and Ethel had never had. He lived a comfortable life in an elegantly proportioned brownstone on the edge of a tree-lined square not far from the ironworks. Looking back, she could scarcely believe her change in fortune. Irvin had encouraged her to visit the dressmaker and order as many new gowns as she wished. She spent her days pursuing leisurely activities, like reading in his small library and visiting interesting places with him in town. Slowly, she learned how to mingle with the wealthier folks of Wilmington at various balls and charity events, but she always felt most at ease when it was just the two of them at home. But Irvin also believed in hard work and in folks bettering themselves. He had built his ironworks business from nothing, and he gently suggested that Emma would also benefit from having some lessons in something she enjoyed, in case she ever needed to find work. She had tried helping him with his books, poring over the ledgers he brought home from work, but arithmetic was not her strength. Her heart lay with creative endeavors, and Irvin encouraged her to follow her ma's example and take up dressmaking. So it was that a sweet old lady called Mrs. Clatterberry came every week to give Emma sewing lessons. Right from her first lesson, the woman exclaimed that Emma had clearly inherited the gift of being a good needlewoman from her ma. Emma started with simple items, but soon progressed to making shirts and gowns that were every bit as accomplished and beautifully made as anything a professional dressmaker could do. "You'll freeze if you stand there much longer." The rough shout from a passing sailor, accompanied by a lewd wink, brought Emma back to the present with a jolt. She looked down at the scuffed toes of her boots, which peeked out from beneath the hem of her plain gray dress. It was a stark reminder that her life of comfort had been snatched away all too soon. It was 6 months ago, just as the leaves on the trees in the square were turning fiery reds and oranges, that the doctor had made his grave announcement. Irvin only had days to live. It was influenza. The cruel disease that had taken her mother too soon had returned to take Irvin from Emma as well. She had barely moved from his bedside for those last few days, and even though he looked frail and old, she didn't see him that way. He told her, between wheezy coughs, how much pleasure she had brought to his life these last few years. It was only then that Emma realized how much she had grown to love Irvin, and that he loved her as well. It had not been the marriage she had imagined for herself as a young woman, but they had loved each other in their own way. Barely a few days had passed after his funeral before Irvin's lawyer dealt the final hammer blow of bad news. Mr. Butler made some bad investments, he had informed her from behind his polished desk. He hoped to recoup the money he lost, but time was not on his side. Emma could remember how her mind had reeled with the news that all his money had been lost. He had even sold the ironworks to pay off his debtors, and although he had left her a modest inheritance, the lawyer admitted that it was far less than he had wanted her to have. She had left the elegant house, which had been her home for almost 5 years, as she had arrived with just a few belongings packed into her carpet bag. Stubborn pride prevented her from asking for help from his acquaintances because she had always sensed they thought him foolish for taking a wife who was so much younger. So with her head held high, she had returned to the tenement where she and her ma used to live. It had gotten even more squalid in the time she had been away, with rats scratching in the walls and drunken fights outside almost every evening. But that had been her life these last 6 months. There was something mesmerizing about the dark waters of the river swirling in front of her, and Emma found herself inching closer to the edge. Even though she had managed to find work with a dressmaker, she was barely earning enough money to pay her rent, let alone feed herself. For one dizzying moment, she felt as though the water was pulling her toward it, as it had for Fiona. Its icy embrace whispered, offering oblivion and a way out of her struggles and loneliness. The long months of winter had been the hardest days of her life, and she could see no way out. Suddenly, the gray clouds parted, and a shaft of weak sunlight filtered through, lighting up a tiny clump of spring flowers, which were blossoming near her. She hadn't noticed them, what with being so trapped in her worries. Emma looked closer at them, marveling at their resilience, that something so beautiful could be flowering when the snows of winter had barely passed. I mustn't give up hope, she murmured, returning to her senses. She stumbled back from the edge of the water, knowing that she could not take that route. The Lord had blessed her in so many ways, giving her a happy childhood with Rosalind, and then the opportunity to better herself for those few years with Irvin. She knew that no matter how bleak things might feel, there must surely be better times ahead. But nothing could hide the fact that she felt so alone. She looked beseechingly up into the sky, wishing she had someone to share her fears with. Lord, please forgive me for forgetting that you hold me in your grace. I don't know what to do for the best, and I can barely afford to keep a roof over my head and feed myself. I beg of you, please show me what to do. I'm so tired of being lonely. In your mercy, I pray that one day I might find love and happiness again. The prayer filled her mind, and she felt tears prick the back of her eyes again. Could you help me, my dear? The voice nearby was high and had a musical lilt. I've only just arrived in Wilmington off the ship from Ireland, and I'm looking for the 3 Points boarding house. Would you happen to know the way? Emma spun around and was startled to see a stooped old lady behind her. She wore a straw bonnet, and her blue eyes were bright with curiosity. Even though she walked with a cane, Emma had not heard her come up behind her. I hope you don't mind me intruding on your moment of solitude, the old woman continued. Her eyes twinkled kindly. My bag is rather heavy, to be sure. Could you help an old lady out and carry it for me? Of course, it would be my pleasure. Emma nodded, grateful to be asked to help. She even found herself smiling because the request reminded her of something Irvin always used to say. When times feel bad, the quickest way to feel better is to help someone in need. It was almost as though the old woman had arrived just in the nick of time to stop Emma from making a terrible choice. The boarding house you're looking for is just along the street and round the corner. You look like you were deep in thought there, the old woman said softly as she hobbled along the sidewalk next to Emma. She glanced up at her with a shrewd expression. You might be surprised at how quickly things can change for the better, my dear. She continued with a smile. I lost someone I loved many years ago, and I thought the Lord had forsaken me. Looking back, I realize it was all part of his plan. She paused for a moment to catch her breath and patted Emma's arm. With her button-bright eyes and short gray curls, she reminded Emma of an inquisitive bird. The Lord has a plan for you too, my dear, she said firmly. You just have to keep your heart open to see it. Emma wasn't sure what to say. It was as if the old lady could see right into her mind and was reading her thoughts. Thank you. I appreciate your kind words. This is the boarding house that you wanted. I'd better go now, as I have to get to work. She mulled over what the old lady had said as she walked away. When she reached the corner of the street, she turned back to wave, but the old lady was nowhere to be seen. Emma shook her head, wondering whether she had imagined their encounter. But as she hurried through the streets toward the dressmaker's shop, she felt lighter than she had since Irvin had died, as though she had finally turned a corner in her grief and loneliness. Something will come up. I know it will. A smile tugged the corners of her mouth, and she found herself humming as the clouds parted again and sunshine lit her way as the first hint of spring came to Wilmington. Chapter 3. Wilmington, Delaware, 1881. By the time Emma left the dressmaker's shop at the end of her shift, the sun had already gone down, and her earlier glimpse of spring had long gone. Frost glittered under each pool of lamplight along the street, and her breath plumed white in front of her face as she hurried home. It would be a long, cold night because she had to be frugal with how much coal she could put on the fire. She thought back longingly to the warm, cozy parlor she had enjoyed when she had lived in Irvin's house. The extravagance of having enough coal for a fire crackling in the hearth all night long felt like a lifetime ago. She stopped at the baker's and counted out a couple of coins to buy a loaf of bread. If she was careful, it would last her several days and help eke out her mutton soup. As she turned toward the rougher part of town, where the tenement buildings crowded in on each other, she felt the familiar trickle of fear in the pit of her stomach. Drunken men were already lurching out of the saloons, shouting after her and wheedling for her attention. They leered at her as though she was a woman of the night, asking her to perform pleasures for them, which made her shudder and walk faster. Homeless families crouched around feeble fires in the deep shadows and alleyways, and, despite her optimism earlier in the day, Emma felt her resolve start to weaken. This could be me soon enough. How easy it would be to find myself without a home or anyone to rely on. Her thoughts churned. Even though the old woman had said the Lord had a plan for her, it was hard to see what it could be when she was only a few steps away from becoming destitute. It would only take a bout of illness for her to miss work, and she would soon find herself unable to pay her rent. She had no savings, and she knew her landlord would throw her onto the street without a moment's hesitation. A sudden shout startled her. "Stop! Come back here, you little—" A scrawny urchin burst out of a nearby alley and ran toward Emma as though his life depended on it. He had a bulging Hessian sack under his arm, and several items tumbled onto the ground as he darted past two drunks who were arm in arm and singing tunelessly. "Good evening, miss," he said impishly, giving Emma a gap-toothed grin. He suddenly swerved and ran between two wagons that were rumbling past to get to the other side of the street. "Look out, you fool! Get out of the way!" The wagon drivers cursed and shook their fists at the boy, but all he cared about was the constable, pursuing him with flat-footed determination. "Did you see which way he went, miss?" The constable came to a halt next to her and took his hat off to mop his brow with a large handkerchief. That little terror was helping himself to all sorts from the stalls in the market. I've had my eye on him all afternoon. It's not right. He didn't pay a cent for any of it, the thieving little so-and-so. Emma shook her head. I'm sorry, Constable, he's long gone. He went in that direction, if that's any help, she added, gesturing vaguely toward where the street urchin had vanished into the darkness. Part of her felt sorry for the boy. He was probably just trying to stave off the hunger in his belly, and no doubt had younger brothers and sisters to feed as well. He dropped a couple of things out of his sack, but I don't think you'll see him again tonight. The constable harumphed in annoyance and strolled over to where she had pointed. He bent over and picked up 2 items, examining them under the street lamp, before returning to her side. It's an apple, a bit bruised, but you can have it if you like. And this newspaper, the Matrimonial Times. I don't have any use for it myself, he added with a chuckle. I've been married for 10 years, and we have 6 children. I don't want to be giving my Lillian the wrong idea. Emma shook her head hastily. What sort of woman did he think she was? I only lost my husband 6 months ago when he passed after catching influenza. I'm certainly not looking to marry again this soon, she retorted, feeling slightly resentful that he had judged her in need of a husband. The constable shrugged and regarded her more closely. You live in the tenement buildings, don't you, miss? He asked. Ain't you the girl who married Mr. Butler? I heard you were back in the neighborhood. This is no place for a young woman like you, if you don't mind me saying. The place is full of drunkards and outlaws. A lot of folks know you used to be married to a wealthy man. They probably think you have all sorts of things worth stealing. Emma's heart began to race at the thought of people gossiping about her. She should have realized that people had long memories. It would explain some of the strange looks she had gotten on many occasions when she was walking home, minding her own business. Nothing could be further from the truth, she said hastily, wanting to correct his assumptions. Mr. Butler lost all his money, and I've been struggling to get by since he died. All the more reason to have a look at that newspaper, wouldn't you say? My wife's niece traveled west to California as a mail-order bride a few years ago, and she said it was the best thing she ever did. I'm sure I don't need to resort to something like that. Not that I'm saying your wife's niece was wrong. She felt tongue-tied discussing romance with a complete stranger. There aren't many opportunities for someone like you around these parts. You can even have the apple to go with it, he added, handing both items to her. Emma was just about to hand them back again when something made her pause. Hadn't she prayed that very morning for the Lord to reveal a new path to her? And hadn't the old woman she'd helped reminded her that she had to keep her heart open to see what that path might be? I suppose the apple would be nice, as long as you don't want to return it to the stall owner. She gave him a tentative smile as she wondered whether the constable's insistence that she should take the Matrimonial Times and consider its contents was a sign. Perhaps this was the very thing she was meant to be paying attention to. Go on, ma'am. What have you got to lose? The constable gave her a broad grin. Heading west has got to be better than here, don't you think? He tucked his handkerchief away and put his hat back on before hurrying away to break up a rowdy fight that had just broken out in front of the saloon on the corner. Emma continued on her way, taking care not to slip on the frosty cobbles. When she worked at the garment factory, she had heard plenty of stories about women heading out west to find love and marry, but had always dismissed them. Surely, if it were that easy, everyone would do it. She had heard of maids marrying handsome ranchers with their own land and other young ladies finding happiness with gentlemen who owned stores and hotels, serving all the men who had headed west for the gold rush. As she reached her dilapidated tenement building and stepped over a pile of trash to open the door, she glanced around, seeing her surroundings through new eyes. If she stayed in Wilmington, she knew she would never leave the slums. It wouldn't be for want of trying, but the odds were stacked against her, just like all the other poor folks barely getting by. Doubts crowded her mind. Was it too good to be true? Just hopping on a train and leaving all this danger and squalor behind for a new start. Suddenly, the thought of it was so appealing that it all but took her breath away. Maybe the constable was right, and she had nothing to lose. she thought, as rats scuttled out of her way in the dingy hallway. Emma laid the newspaper on the table and hung her shawl in front of the fire to dry the dampness, which never really seemed to leave her clothes. She bustled around her small room, heating up what was left of her soup and adding a scrape of butter to her bread. Her eye was continually drawn back to the paper, which had smudges of mud on it, but she deliberately resisted reading it, saving it until after she had eaten and done her evening chores. Finally, she could put it off no longer. She rattled the poker in the fire and poured herself a cup of tea before sitting down. Her fingers trembled as she turned the first page, and a sudden image of Irvin came to her. He had begged her not to close her heart to love again after he was gone. "You're still young, Emma. You deserve to be happy again." The memory of his words gave her some comfort. But the matrimonial times? "I can't even believe that I would consider such a thing," she muttered to herself with a wry smile. She shook her head, figuring that it would at least help her while away a few minutes until it was time for bed. But before she knew it, she was engrossed. There was page after page of advertisements from gentlemen all over the country seeking a wife for all manner of different reasons. Some were looking for companionship, just like Irvin had. Others wanted someone to help care for their children. A few stated plainly that they were struggling to manage their ranches without the help of a wife. And some, more romantically, said that they were looking for love. As she flicked the pages back and forth and the embers in the fire died, there was one advertisement that caught her eye. Could you be the answer to a lonely rancher's dreams? Walter Harrison is a second-generation rancher searching for a wife who will bring the companionship that's been missing for too long for this hard-working gentleman. Tall and strong, Walter is searching for true love. If you're looking for a new start out west, with all the rewards of outdoor life and a family homestead, this could be just what you've been waiting for. The family ranch is just an hour's ride from Rocky River, with a prize herd of cattle, lush pastures, and mountain meadows for summer grazing, as well as a river for fishing. Walter is looking for a wife who relishes a new challenge and, in return, offers a secure future with the chance to have a family. Are you the right woman for Walter? The best way to find out is to write back and tell him a little about yourself and why you want to head out west. Don't be shy and let this chance pass you by. Walter promises a swift reply to everyone who writes back and is eagerly awaiting your letter. The answer to your dreams? Emma chuckled and spluttered as her tea went down the wrong way. Compared to all the other rather earnest advertisements, it seemed that Walter was the only one with a sense of humor, which she supposed was a good thing because the whole process felt ridiculously similar to the market stall owners shouting the loudest, trying to hawk their wares with fanciful claims. She stood up and cleaned her teacup, ready for the morning, pushing the thought of marriage aside. What would a rancher like Walter want with someone like me? He'll have dozens of replies. It would just be a waste of paper to send him a reply. She added one last lump of coal to the fire and glanced at her ma's sewing box, wishing Rosalind was still alive to give her some advice. But as the minutes ticked by, and she found herself hovering near the newspaper again instead of getting ready for bed, she couldn't help but revise her opinion. Maybe she shouldn't think of herself as just a lowly seamstress. Her ma had raised her well, and Irvin had helped her make more of herself if she could just get away from the slums. Maybe I'll regret it if I don't reply, she muttered. Before she lost her nerve, Emma pulled out a piece of paper from her stationery supplies and turned the lamp up to compose a letter she would never have foreseen herself writing. She held nothing back, thinking that it would be best to be honest. She wrote about her marriage to Irvin, a much older man, and how he had encouraged her to pursue her love of dressmaking before he passed. She explained that she had fallen on hard times, even though Irvin had wanted better for her, and that he had encouraged her to open her heart to love again in the future. Emma admitted that she knew little about life on the frontier, but that she was eager to learn and knew the value of hard work. And finally, she said that she hoped Walter would consider her response and write back soon to let her know his thoughts. By the time dawn broke, Emma's eyes felt gritty from her sleepless night. It was hard to imagine that marrying a man she had never met could work. But then she reminded herself that she hadn't known Irvin before their wedding, and it had turned out to be just fine. In fact, better than fine. She hastily ate a small bowl of porridge and left the tenement earlier than usual, with the letter tucked in her dress pocket. Having to step over the drunks who sprawled in so many doorways gave her the impetus she needed. She mailed the letter with a prayer that it would reach Walter Harrison in good time and that he would reply as promised. Her fingers flew over the garments she was mending that day, and the repetitive work helped calm her racing thoughts. One minute, she felt hopeful for a better future, and the next, she was despondent that Mr. Harrison would probably be inundated with replies and choose someone far more suitable to ranch life than her. But whatever happens, at least I'm doing something to improve my prospects. She thought back to how many advertisements there had been and smiled to herself. Even if Mr. Harrison didn't pick her, it had opened her eyes to what lay beyond the confines of Wilmington. It sounded like living out west could bring great rewards if a person was prepared to work, and hard work was something she had never shied away from. Chapter 4. Rocky River, Wyoming, 1881. Gabriel Baxter paused from his task of hammering 4 new horseshoes on his anvil. He was already running late from trying to persuade his daughter Bethany to go to school that day, but in the end, her simple logic had persuaded him that it was no use. "I've already learned enough, Pa," 12-year-old Bethany had reasoned as she served him a plate of eggs and bacon. "Besides, if I don't look after Jonah, you won't be able to work as much as you want to." She had been very matter-of-fact about it, and it was true in some ways. But what had caused Gabe a pang of sorrow was that he knew part of the reason why Bethany no longer wanted to go to school was because of what some of the other children said about him. He's like some sort of monster. How can you bear to sit at the table and eat with him looking like that? He had heard the cruel taunts she had suffered, but there was nothing he could do about it. Gabe stepped away from the anvil to add more coal to his hearth, unconsciously turning his head to one side to avoid the blast of heat as he did so. He placed his hand flat on his cheek, feeling the rough scars under his fingertips. If he thought about it too much, he still found it hard to accept the fact that he had been so badly injured in the explosion at the mine where he used to work. "There's no use dwelling on it. I was one of the lucky ones," he reminded himself in a low mutter. A frown furrowed his brow. It was a shame his wife, Josephine, hadn't seen it the same way. 2 of his friends had died in the blast, and in the darkest days afterward, when his face had been heavily bandaged, he was ashamed to admit to himself that there had been times when he had wished he had died as well. At one point, he had feared he might lose his sight, but in the end, the doctor's good care and the passage of time had healed the worst of his injuries, at least as much as they ever would be. But it hasn't healed his marriage. Josephine had refused to even look at him when the bandages were eventually removed. Her revulsion was plain to see. Then, 4 weeks later, he had woken one morning to find a note on the kitchen table tucked under the coffee pot. His wife of over 10 years had run away with the deputy manager of the mine, who had recently started working there. Her blunt words made it perfectly clear that she felt she deserved better than to be tied to a scarred man for the rest of her life, and that being a mother had never really suited her. She had even gone so far as to wish him well for the future, and that he should find another woman to marry if he felt so inclined, because she and her new sweetheart were making a better life for themselves in New York, and she had no intention of ever coming back. He remembered bunching her note into a ball and throwing it into the fire before watching it burn away to nothing, feeling hollow inside. The pain that had settled in him like a hard shell around his heart was not only for losing the woman he thought had loved him, but for 10-year-old Bethany and baby Jonah, who was only a few months old. How would he ever explain that their ma thought more of a dalliance with a man she had only known for a short time, and the excitement of setting up home with him far away, than being with her own children? The manager at the mine, Mr. Galloway, had been keen to avoid any investigation into the explosion. He had paid out the two women who had been left widowed and insisted that Gabe should also accept a sum of money to help him on his way into a new life. And so it was that after a 2-week ride, with all their belongings piled up in the back of the wagon, Gabriel had rolled into Rocky River. There was something about the lush green pastures and the way the mountains cradled the town that felt like a balm to his exhausted senses. The first thing he had seen was a painted wooden sign nailed to a fence post beside the road, announcing a plot of land with a modest log cabin and a couple of barns for sale. The plot and homestead were set a little way off the road, on the edge of town. Bethany had pointed to the sun glinting off the stream, which wound through the land behind the barns, and the climbing rose that grew wild, creeping over the top of the cabin. It was the first time he had seen her smile since Josephine had abandoned them, which was what swayed him to head straight to the lawyer in town to make an offer on it. Gabe had known straight away that the land alone would not be enough to sustain him and the children, but decided that he could ask around for other work soon enough. But it seemed fate was on his side for once. The blacksmith recently left to head to Montana. Maybe a man with your skills could do worse than to consider taking up that work, the lawyer had suggested as he'd signed off the paperwork and handed over the title document. Gabe's job at the mine had been repairing tools. He was used to forging whatever they needed, and when the lawyer had assured him there would be plenty of business, he had finally felt more optimistic for the future. Now there was an ornate iron sign at the entrance for Baxter's forge, and he had gotten used to calling himself the town's new blacksmith. "It's just me, my anvil, the children, and our animals," he often said with a wry smile. He liked to keep himself to himself, and usually the only visitors he received were folks needing his services. Maybe he was in danger of becoming a recluse, but being on the edge of town suited him just fine, because Josephine had made it perfectly clear that he was not the kind of person folks in polite company liked to mix with, now that his face was disfigured. The sound of a horse approaching caught his attention, and he saw Bethany waving a greeting at the man riding toward them from where she was fetching the vegetables from the garden for dinner. "Howdy, Bethany. I hope you're taking good care of that pa of yours." The man's voice was jovial, and Gabe walked out into the sunshine. "How are you doing, Walter?" The visitor was riding a dappled gray gelding and had a smaller horse by his side on a lead rein. "Do you need new shoes for your horse today, or is it something else you're wanting?" Walter Harrison halted in front of the barn and lifted his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow before slowly dismounting. His face was florid, and his shirt strained over his belly. Everyone in Rocky River knew that Walter enjoyed the good life, but Gabe couldn't help but notice that the man seemed more breathless than usual. "Can you put some new shoes on this mare for me, Gabe?" He gestured toward the horse he had on the lead rein. "I bought her for a good price at the horse sale in Hudsonville, and I want her in the best condition, ready for when my new wife arrives." "Your new wife?" Usually, Gabe tried not to talk to his customers about matters of the heart, but the words were out of his mouth before he could stop himself. Even though he'd only been in Rocky River for a couple of years, everybody knew that Walter was a self-confessed bachelor. He made no secret of the fact. The first time he'd shown up at the forge to get a horse shod, he grumbled that his ma was trying to fix him up with all sorts of young women and that he preferred life as a single man. Clearly, things had changed. Walter nodded and grinned, looking almost embarrassed. "Quite the surprise, huh?" he said with a chuckle. "I've seen so many of my friends and neighbors getting married. I got to thinking it might be time for me to settle down as well." "So, who is she? Anyone I know?" Walter shuffled his feet in the dust. "Well, that's the funny thing. Mrs. Devereaux from the marriage agency caught me in a moment of weakness and persuaded me to place an advertisement for a mail-order bride. I figured if I'm going to get married, I'd rather find my own wife instead of leaving it to my ma to make the choice." Gabe tied the neat bay mare to his hitching rail and pulled out a knife from his leather apron to start trimming her hooves. She stood patiently without fidgeting as he lifted each leg and clasped it between his knees, working methodically and talking to her in a low voice every so often. So this new wife of yours is arriving soon then? Is she? You've certainly gotten her a nice little horse here. Walter shrugged and shook his head. Not for a little while, but the mare was too good to turn down. He folded his arms and leaned against the barn door, clearly not in any hurry to do more chores in town. I had a good number of replies to my advertisement, and there is a young lady who I particularly liked the sound of, called Emma. Uh-huh. Aren't you worried about proposing to someone you don't really know? Gabe asked. His curiosity was piqued, and he rubbed his back as he straightened up again. She might not be at all like what you imagine. He thought back to the way Josephine had treated him. He had never imagined the woman he loved would run off with another man. But she had. Maybe there was no best way to meet a trustworthy woman, he mused. No, I'm not the worrying kind, Walter said with an expansive shrug, as though the thought had never occurred to him. Mrs. Devereux said, "We'll probably exchange letters for a few months. I'm sure I'll know her well enough after that." Gabe wondered what it must be like to be so certain that things would turn out well, the way Walter did. He used to be like that, but then the explosion and Josephine's betrayal had knocked the confidence out of him, teaching him that it didn't pay to be too sure about things. It was safer to expect the worst. That way, he wouldn't get lulled into a false sense of security and have his heart broken again. Walter glanced toward Bethany, who was holding Jonah's hand as the little boy toddled around the garden on chubby legs, chasing a butterfly. "Isn't it about time you thought about taking a new wife? You can't keep hankering after someone who's never coming back." He shot Gabe a sympathetic smile to show that he meant no malice by his comment. Some of the ladies who replied to my advertisement sounded mighty fine. Why don't you go and speak with Mrs. Devereux? I'm sure she'll help you find someone who would be happy to marry a man who already has 2 children. Gabe didn't reply for a moment, focusing all his energy on hammering out the mare's new shoes on his anvil. Walter had been tactful enough not to mention the way he looked, but Gabe knew it would put most women off. He wondered idly how Mrs. Devereux would phrase an advertisement for him. Having 2 children was the least of his worries. As Josephine had proved, who would want to marry a man like him, with half of his face scarred? And he certainly wouldn't want to invite a woman out west under false pretenses, just to see the kind of disappointment and revulsion in her eyes that Josephine hadn't bothered to hide. "Bethany and I are fine as we are, and Jonah won't even remember his ma. He's only ever known it to be the 3 of us." Gabe was aware that his reply sounded prickly, but Walter didn't seem to notice. "Are you sure it's the right thing for Bethany, though?" Walter said casually. "I'd have thought a growing girl like her would benefit from having a ma to guide her as she turns into a young woman. And you must get a bit lonesome in the evenings as well," he added. It was Gabe's turn to shrug this time. "We do okay," he muttered. But in his heart, he knew Walter was right. Bethany was shy and struggling with some of the nasty comments about the way he looked. And now that he had accepted that Josephine was never coming back, lately he had started to find the evenings lonely, but he had never admitted it to anyone. He didn't mind his own company during the day because work kept him busy. But when the children had gone to bed, he wished there was a kind-hearted woman who he could sit on the veranda with under the roses, talking about the day. But I thought that's the sort of marriage Josephine and I had, and look how wrong I was. Gabe frowned, wanting to change the subject. "That's the mare all finished with now. I expect you'll want to get on your way." Walter might have thought he was being helpful, and his comments were well-meaning, but Gabe didn't relish talking about how to raise his children with a man who had yet to settle down with anyone. "I'll let you know how it goes with this young woman I'm going to start writing to," Walter said cheerfully as he mounted his gelding and turned both horses around to leave. "I reckon when you see how well it goes, you'll change your mind. I've never felt more hopeful about the future than I do now." Gabe watched him ride away and shook his head with amusement. Walter certainly had an irrepressible zest for life, that was for sure. He lifted his arms to stretch his back. Even though his injuries had healed well, the doc had told him to take it easy going forward. and he couldn't afford to let niggling aches and pains go unnoticed, not with Bethany and Jonah depending on him. He decided to take a break for a few minutes and grabbed an armful of hay for his horses, throwing it over the fence of the nearest paddock. "That's the trouble with folks who fancy themselves in love, Coco," he said, as his paint mare came trotting over. "They think everyone else should be in love, too." He reached over the fence and patted her neck. Considering she had been covered in scabs and as thin as a rake when he'd first taken her on, she was coming along nicely. The scabs had healed, and she was slowly starting to trust him after being mistreated by whoever had abandoned her at the side of the road. He still didn't know who had left her there, but there was no way he would turn his back on an animal in need. The horse snickered and swished her tail as she grabbed a mouthful of hay and pranced sideways. "Oh, you're feeling playful now you've seen Dash, are you?" Gabe grinned as the family's three-legged dog came bouncing over from the cabin. He'd had no intention of getting a dog when they arrived at Rocky River, but they'd seen him tied to the fence with a piece of frayed rope when they were headed into town one day. When he was still there the following morning, and Sheriff Jackson told him he must be an unwanted stray, Bethany had pleaded for him to come home with them. So now Dash was part of their ever-expanding menagerie of animals that nobody else wanted, which also included a cat that was half-blind but still good at keeping the mice down in the barn, and an old mule that had seen better days. "Why do you keep them?" Walter had asked curiously the last time he'd been waiting for his horse to be shod. "They're not productive. If anything, all these waifs and strays are costing you money, surely?" "They're more interesting than the perfect animals," Gabe had mumbled. "It pleases me to win their trust and see them come to something when other folks have given up on them." Of course, if he was being honest with himself, Gabe knew it was about more than that. It was because every creature, no matter how damaged, deserved a chance at happiness and being wanted. It was for the same reason that he prayed that the Lord might one day show him a way to happiness and be wanted by someone special again, too. Chapter 5. Wilmington, Delaware, 1881. Emma was shocked and then delighted when, much to her surprise, she received a prompt reply from Walter Harrison. And it wasn't just a brief comment letting her know that he had chosen to correspond with someone else. Instead, the letter was chatty and engaging, and he sounded genuinely interested in finding out more about her. She read it over and over, trying to glean whatever she could about the man who had first caught her eye with his unusual advertisement, even tucking it under her pillow for safekeeping at night. As winter finally relinquished its grip on Wilmington and the spring days started to get longer, Walter's letters provided a bright spot in Emma's life, and she learned more about him with each letter that came. He confessed that he had always thought himself too busy to get married, but that his ma had been encouraging him to change his mind, which made her smile. Without sounding as though he was bragging, she got the impression he was a popular man in Rocky River who knew almost everyone. He explained that quite a few of his fellow ranching neighbors had successfully courted their mail-order brides who had traveled from the east, which was what had persuaded him to do likewise. Emma liked the fact that he was honest about changing his mind instead of trying to convince her that he had always hoped for romance. Even though she was still only young, the fact that she had already been married and widowed after losing Irvin gave her an old head on young shoulders, and she appreciated Walter's candor. Walter told her much about his ranch. The way he described it made it sound like an idyllic place to live, but he made no illusion of how much hard work was involved in running the place. He explained that, although he wasn't what some might consider a wealthy man, they got by well enough, and he had grand plans to expand his herd of cattle and perhaps even plant an apple orchard to diversify his income. It didn't take long for Mrs. Nolt, the dressmaker Emma worked for, to notice a change in her demeanor. "Have you come into some good luck?" she asked as Emma came through the door one morning, rosy-cheeked and humming cheerfully. "Or perhaps you've met a nice young gentleman?" Her expression was curious as she looked up from the alteration she was making to an elegant ball gown for one of their wealthier customers. Emma hesitated, not knowing whether it was wise to share her news, but then realized it was better to give her employer a hint that things might change sometime soon. Mrs. Nolt had always been good to her, and it didn't feel right to keep secrets. "I have met someone," she confided. She quickly took off her coat and tied her work apron around her waist before sitting at the table where she sewed every day. "I was wondering when you might tell me," Mrs. Nolt said with a happy smile. "Is it something to do with the letters you've been receiving? I've noticed you reading them during your lunch breaks." Emma felt her cheeks getting warm. She hadn't realized it was that obvious. "You don't need to worry about me being cross," Mrs. Nolt continued with a twinkle in her eyes. "As you know, Irvin sent me a letter when he thought he was coming down with influenza to ask whether I would be willing to give you a job if the unthinkable happened. He was always a very good customer for my little business, and he told me that he wanted you to find happiness again if his health failed." "And I have appreciated everything you've done, Mrs. Nolt," Emma said hastily. "So, as it's these letters you've been receiving which have put you in such a good mood, would I be right in thinking you're hoping to become a mail-order bride? I've seen plenty of young women in Wilmington writing to men on the frontier and then traveling out west to get married. I even considered it myself after my husband died, but I figured I'd left it too late." Emma felt a sense of relief at not having to keep her secret any longer. She had no real friends she could talk to about it in the tenement building where she lived, and she nodded eagerly. "You did? I never thought it would come to anything. But I replied to an advertisement, and now a rancher called Walter has been writing to me these last few weeks." Mrs. Nolt shook out some fabric that she was measuring and laid it on her cutting table. "You deserve some happiness, my dear." She pinned a seam and started cutting. "He'll be a lucky gentleman to call you his wife." "Oh, we're only exchanging letters at the moment." Emma blushed even more as she thought about how keen Walter sounded in his letters. Sometimes he didn't even wait for her reply before sending her another one, and she had gotten the impression that he was the sort of man who liked to act fast once he'd made a decision about something. "Well, I shall certainly miss you if he proposes, but I wouldn't stand in your way of a fresh start. I hope you will still carry on doing some dressmaking in your new life. You have a talent for it that shouldn't be wasted." As the weeks passed, Emma tried not to worry about her perilous financial situation. The landlord had visited a few days earlier to tell everyone that the rent would be going up at the end of the month. But as Mrs. Nolt had already given Emma a small pay rise at the beginning of the year, she knew she couldn't ask for another one. Every evening, she counted out her dwindling coins, and she had to face the fact that her money was running out. It felt as though the odds were stacked against her, and she had a whole new appreciation of how much of a struggle it must have been for her ma to raise her, and gratitude for Irvin's kindness in paying for their rent. What if Walter changes his mind? Or worse, what if something happens to him? If she let them, the doubts and fears gnawed away at her, and she knew her future was still far from certain. Walter sounded so positive about his life out west, but Emma could remember reading stories in Irvin's small library about the dangers of the frontier lands. There were mountain lion attacks, bears came down from the woods to maul the farm animals, and she had heard enough about outlaws and cattle rustlers to know that anything might happen to Walter as he went about his work on the ranch. In the darkest hour before dawn, when her imagination was running away with her, Emma couldn't help but worry that her hopes for a better future with Walter might be dashed before they'd even had a chance to make a go of things. But finally, on the first properly warm day of spring, Emma received another letter with the question she had been waiting for. "My dearest Emma, I hope you don't mind me writing again so soon, but now that the cattle are out on the spring pastures, I have a little more time on my hands. I've enjoyed getting to know you through your letters, and I figure if I don't ask now, some other gentleman might sweep you off your feet, which I would certainly regret. I've come to know you as a kind and caring young woman who tries to look on the bright side of things, even though you have suffered hardship and disappointment. I admire that in you and how determined you are not to let your past hold you back. I know it's quick, but I would like to ask for your hand in marriage. Will you come to Rocky River and be my wife, Emma? I believe we can have a happy future together and that you will grow to love the ranch as much as I do. As a gesture of good faith, I have enclosed money for your railroad fare so that you know my proposal is genuine. Send me a telegraph and let me know when you will arrive in Rocky River. You'll have to get a stagecoach from Hudsonville, so your message should reach me in plenty of time. Ma is delighted and looking forward to meeting you, and I am too. I will book Pastor Franklin to marry us as soon as you arrive. Yours sincerely, Walter Harrison. Emma read the letter twice, scarcely able to believe that her future was about to change so dramatically. Without a moment's hesitation, she folded her clothes and hastily packed her belongings into her carpet bag. She would take the earliest train heading west and hope that the landlord wouldn't demand any extra rent for the inconvenience of finding a new lodger to take over her room. The tenement was so overcrowded that it would probably be snapped up within hours. And as she walked to Mrs. Knowlt's dressmaking shop for her final day working there, she saw Wilmington through fresh eyes, knowing that she would probably never return. It felt poignant walking through the neighborhood she had known for so long. Every street held memories, but there was no point clinging to her past. She would treasure the happy times she'd had with her ma and later with Irvin, but she knew that if she stayed, her future was bleak. There was nobody here to help her out in difficult times, and the fact that she had no family meant that she would struggle to find a husband. So many of the folks who lived in the tenement buildings were barely managing to get by, and she knew that would be her fate if she didn't say yes to Walter's proposal. Congratulations, my dear. I'm so happy for you. Mrs. Knowlt brushed away her tears of happiness an hour later when Emma showed her Walter's letter. I'd like to get the first train out, but I feel bad leaving so hastily, Emma said. Are you sure you will be able to find another seamstress to take my place? I already have 2 other young girls waiting to start, but I didn't want to say anything in case the letters came to nothing. Mrs. Knowlt opened her fabric cupboard and pulled out a soft velvet shawl, handing it to Emma with a smile. I made this for you. Take it with my blessing, and I wish you all the very best in your married life. This time, it was Emma's turn to blink back her tears. The shawl was a smoky purple color, like Scottish heather, and she tied it over her shoulders with gratitude. I chose it especially to show off your green eyes and dark hair, Mrs. Knowlt said, holding up a mirror with an admiring look on her face. I want Walter to fall head over heels in love with you as soon as he sees you. Now, I expect you have a lot to do before your journey, so if you want to stop working now, I won't mind. After a tearful farewell, Emma took a different route back to her tenement building. Mrs. Knowlt was right. There were 2 final important things she needed to attend to before leaving. First, she turned toward the river. She reached the spot where she had stood just a few short months ago, contemplating Fiona's tragic death, and remembered the message the old woman had given her. Thank you, Lord. You did hear my prayer asking for help, and I'm eternally grateful for your merciful kindness. As she stood watching the water swirling past, she realized how much had changed and thought fondly of her friend. Fiona hadn't been so fortunate as to escape the grinding poverty of the slums, but it made her all the more determined to make the most of the opportunities that lay ahead. Next, Emma walked back through the market and spent her last few coins on a bunch of spring flowers before heading to the graveyard where Irvin was buried. Thank you for being a kind-hearted husband, Irvin, and showing me that sometimes love can blossom in the most unexpected circumstances, she whispered. She bowed her head and took the time to think about the happy years they had enjoyed together. She would always be indebted to him, and as she laid the flowers in front of his headstone for one last time, her heart was full of gratitude that he had given her his blessing to remarry. There was a newfound sense of optimism and lightness in her heart as Emma walked briskly toward the railroad station later that day. She boarded the train and settled into her seat on the crowded carriage with a sigh of relief, glad to be on her way. The changeable weather of Wilmington had brought rain and fog by the time the train rolled out of the station, amidst the roar of metal wheels, rumbling on the track, and clouds of steam from the engine. It felt fitting that the familiar sights of her hometown were blurred by the raindrops on the window as they slipped into the distance, and she silently bade farewell to the only place she had ever known. Emma felt competing waves of excitement and anxiety in her chest as she listened to the chatter of the other passengers in the background. Although his letters hadn't held back on detail, Walter sounded very different from Irvin. She hoped they would get along well. As for falling in love in a romantic sense, if they could grow to love one another, that would be a bonus, she thought pragmatically. It was in the hands of the Lord now, and she believed that just as she had become fond of Irvin, it would be possible to love and appreciate Walter over time, even though they had never met. She stretched her legs out and smiled at the woman sitting opposite her. It would be a long journey, at least a week on the train, and then several more days by stagecoach, but she was ready for a new adventure. Chapter 6. Rocky River, Wyoming, 1881. Emma stepped down from the stagecoach just as the afternoon sun was at its warmest and smiled at the driver, who was grappling with banded boxes and carpet bags, as well as some sacks of dried goods. Just doing the owners of the general store a favor and fetching these from Hudsonville to save them a trip, he said with a grin as he saw her staring at the sacks. Although she felt weary from the journey, the lively spring breeze blowing through Rocky River felt refreshing. Everything felt so different. It was like her senses were being assailed from every direction. The scent of fresh grass and flowers wafted from the park, where two men were hard at work, and the sunshine felt pure and bright. She realized it was because she had gotten so used to the smoke belching from the many ironworks in Wilmington that the air never felt properly clear. "This is charming," she murmured to herself, looking up and down the street, taking in her new surroundings. Walter's letters hadn't done it justice. The town was larger than he had described, and there was an array of stores and small businesses dotted along the main street. Several wagons rumbled past, and then a trio of cowboys trotted by on their horses, enthusiastically discussing which saloon to call at. "Who are you here to meet?" the stagecoach driver asked her and the two other older ladies, Olive and Cecilia, who had traveled from Hudsonville with her. "We're staying at the Mistletoe Lodge boarding house for a few days," the two ladies said in unison. "And then our cousin Gregory is taking us out to Winter Falls." The stagecoach driver scratched his head and nodded. "Well, you'd best stock up on supplies if you're headed out there, ladies," he said helpfully. "It's nothing but a one-horse outpost with no stores. Ethel and Elmer Duffy will have everything you need at the Mercantile." He turned toward Emma and raised his eyebrows. "How about you, ma'am?" Emma swallowed nervously. Now that they had arrived, her heart was thumping painfully in her chest. Walter Harrison. He's meeting me in town, and then we're going to see Pastor Franklin to get married." "Walter, huh? Well, he sure isn't the sort of man to hang around," the driver chuckled. He slammed the stagecoach door closed and glanced up and down the street. "Looks like we got here just in time. That's him headed toward us right now." Emma felt almost faint with relief as she saw a horse trotting smartly down the street, pulling a wagon, with the dust flying up behind it. On the train, she had overheard some of the other mail-order brides whispering tales of women abandoned at their destinations, with no means of supporting themselves or being stood up on their wedding day, and even of their grooms not existing. "Your sweetheart looks like he's in a hurry to meet you," one of the other ladies commented, giving Emma a delighted smile. Before she even had a chance to worry about whether Walter might turn out to have been economical with the truth about what he looked like, she was doubly relieved to see that he was exactly as he'd described. Tall, tanned from working outside, and about 10 years older than her. "Miss Butler, I was mighty concerned I might be late, but I'm pleased to see I had nothing to worry about." Walter pulled the wagon to a halt and jumped down, striding toward them. He slapped the stagecoach driver on his back and chuckled. "I hope you've taken good care of the ladies, Pete, and given them a great first impression of our little part of Wyoming," he joked. "Howdy, Walter. Nothing but the best for the folks I bring to Rocky River," the driver shot back. Now that her fiancé was standing in front of her, Emma understood why there had always been a sense of urgency about his letters. Everything about him seemed as though he was in a hurry. He grabbed her carpet bag and swung it into the back of his wagon, and then swept his hat off with a flourish, beaming at her and the other two travelers. "Welcome to Rocky River, everyone! Shall I help you up, Miss Butler?" He jerked his head in the direction of the seat at the front of his wagon and held his hand out. "It sure is nice to finally put a face to the name, and you're mighty pretty, if you don't mind me saying." Emma felt slightly flustered at his speedy introduction. It's nice to meet you too, Mr. Harrison." "Mr. Harrison? Me?" He looked over his shoulder and then burst out laughing. "Nobody but the lawyer and bank manager called me that. It's Walter to my friends." He whisked Emma up onto the seat and then hurried around to the other side of the wagon to jump up himself. "Let's go," he yelled, snatching up the reins and slapping them over the back of his horse, which jerked forward in the harness straight into a prancing trot. Emma grabbed her bonnet, which slipped back on her head as the breeze caught it. "Have you been busy on the ranch today?" she asked as they bowled along the street. She wished for a moment that they could have stopped at a tea room to have some refreshments and to give her a chance to get over being cooped up in the carriage, but it seemed rude to ask. "I sure have, but then every day is busy on the ranch. The cattle broke out of the paddock overnight and took themselves up to the high ground, so I've been chasing them down off the mountain all morning." "Wretched things," he exclaimed with a grin. "I only just put them out on the best spring grazing, but they still thought the high ground looked better. It only takes one of them to get the idea, and then the rest of them follow. You'll soon learn what they're like once you're out there helping me." She tried to imagine herself chasing runaway cattle around the ranch and felt a ripple of worry that she might not be up to the task. She had figured Walter would prefer her to spend more time in the house, cooking and cleaning, and she hoped he would give her a little bit of time to adapt to this strange new life. "Did you manage to get them all back in safely?" she asked faintly. The wagon jolted over a bump in the road, and she gripped the seat. "Eventually," he muttered, with a roll of his eyes. "But if it's not one thing, it's another. I need to plow up the 5-acre paddock field ready for sowing the wheat, but when I went to hitch the plow up, I discovered that part of it was broken." He jerked his thumb toward a jumble of metal in the back of the wagon. "I hope you don't mind, but we need to drop this off at Baxter's forge before we go to church. I need Gabe to fix it up for me quick. I can't afford to be late with the plowing." Of course, I know how important the ranch is. At least, I'm starting to learn. "So tell me about your journey." As Emma explained about all the places she had passed through on her way to Wyoming, she got the impression that Walter was only half listening. He seemed to be bubbling over with nervous energy and lifted his hat to holler a greeting at almost every person they passed in the street. "Folks are curious about you, that's for sure," he said with a roar of laughter, as a group of men outside the Black Crow Saloon turned to stare and nudge each other. "I reckon all the tongues will soon be wagging at the news that old Walt is finally settling down with a beauty like you." "Oh, I'm sure they're not that interested," Emma mumbled, not knowing where to look. She found herself suddenly longing for Irvin's calm, orderly demeanor. He had always been rather protective of her, whereas it seemed like the men on the frontier were rougher and thought nothing of staring with outright delight at the sight of a new young woman in town. She could feel a headache starting behind her eyes and was struggling to keep up with the way Walter jumped from one topic of conversation to the next, like a leaf skittering in the breeze. "I'm sure it must be just nerves," she thought to herself. "Even though we've been writing to each other for months, it's still a big change for a man to wed for the first time." Nervousness made Emma quiet, but she knew for some folks it had the opposite effect. "Baxter's forge is just up yonder, so I'll drop the plowshares there, and then we'll turn back and go to the church. Pastor Franklin is expecting us." Walter turned to Emma and gave her a wide smile. His blue eyes were bright with enthusiasm, and she felt mean for finding him too loud. "That sounds wonderful." I still can't believe it's my wedding day. Ma wasn't sure about me going down this route to find a bride. She still isn't completely convinced, truth be told. But I'm sure she'll come around to the idea once she's gotten to know you." He grinned at her again. Emma felt the full force of his charm and wondered why it left her feeling strangely flat. Was it because she had spent so long thinking about this moment that the reality felt almost disappointing? She tried to remind herself that growing fond of Irvin had taken time, but Walter was only a few years older than her and a confident, handsome rancher. She had expected to feel a small tug of attraction at the very least, but it seemed strangely absent. Then she thought about his casual comment about his ma. In his letters, he'd said his ma was looking forward to meeting her, but now it sounded as though he was being overly positive and breezily ignoring the fact that his mother might not be as welcoming as she'd hoped. She found herself feeling full of doubts again and turned away, hoping that the clapboard houses with their pretty gardens and rolling hills beyond would calm her nerves. "I'm talking too much, aren't I?" Walter said cheerfully a moment later. "No, it's just a lot to take in," Emma replied, glad that he had realized. She smiled inwardly, giving herself a stern talking to. This isn't a penny romance novel where folks fall in love at first glance. Of course, she shouldn't expect to feel love-struck the moment she laid eyes on Walter. The very idea of it was absurd. Chapter 7. Walter continued to talk about his ranch as they approached the barn where the blacksmith worked. Off to one side of the barn, Emma noticed a sturdy log cabin with a rambling rose that was just coming into leaf, trailing over the roof. A girl with curly, dark hair was sweeping the veranda, pausing every so often to bend down and talk to a little boy who was playing with a pile of wooden bricks. She saw washing hanging on the line in the garden, which looked a little overgrown. Emma wondered where the girl's mother was, feeling momentarily envious of such a cozy family scene. That will be Walter and me soon, she reminded herself. She longed so much to have a family of her own that it felt almost like a hunger within her. "Howdy, Gabriel," Walter called. He scrambled down from the wagon just as a figure appeared in the doorway of the barn. "Good afternoon, Walter," the man replied. He stood back slightly in the shadow of the doorway, so it was hard for Emma to see him properly. Her first impression was that he was tall and well-built. "What are you doing here? I thought you had an appointment with the pastor today." Walter had already hurried around to the back of the wagon and was wrestling with the plowshares, trying to drag them off the back. "I meant to come in earlier, but the cattle escaped, so I had to chase them back down from the mountain. These plowshares have rusted through. Is there any chance you can fix them for me by tomorrow?" Gabriel Baxter stepped out of the barn doorway into the sunshine and glanced sideways toward Emma. "You must be Miss Butler," he said calmly. "It's nice to make your acquaintance." "Thank you. You have a charming home, Mr. Baxter," Emma replied. She suddenly wished she'd had a chance to fix her hair before being introduced to him, and tried to tuck away the curls that had escaped from her bun in the breeze, feeling self-conscious. As if reading her mind, Mr. Baxter called the girl from the veranda. "Bethany, I need to help Walter for a couple of minutes. How about you offer Miss Butler some lemonade?" He turned back toward Emma with a questioning look. "I expect you've just arrived on the stagecoach, huh? Feel free to take a walk in the garden and stretch your legs, or go inside if you want to freshen up." He came closer to the wagon to help her down, and she noticed he kept his face slightly turned away. "That's a grand idea," Walter called from the back of the wagon. "I should have thought of it myself, but my mind has been on other things, what with these plowshares needing your attention, Gabe." "Thank you. That's very kind," Emma said. She looked up at Gabriel with a smile. But he didn't meet her eye. He was a good 4 inches taller than her, and his dark hair curled on his collar in need of a trim. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscles that looked like sinuous ropes. He wore a thick leather apron tied around his waist, and Emma could smell the scent of molten metal and smoke on him, underlined with a muskier odor of horses. It was the smell of honest, hard work, and she found it pleasant after a week of the stale air of the train. "Are you sure your wife won't mind?" "I don't want to be any trouble." Gabriel's eyes narrowed slightly. "She's not here. It's no trouble. Bethany will show you in." He turned away to help Walter get the plowshares off the wagon, and Emma noticed that the side of his face was puckered and scarred beneath his neatly trimmed beard. She had seen scarring just like it before, with one of Irvin's workers who had gotten badly burnt at the ironworks, and her heart squeezed with sympathy for him. She noticed as well that he walked with a slight limp, and the arm on that side of his body seemed stiff. "I appreciate your generosity. It's kind of you to be so thoughtful," she murmured. He turned back, seeming surprised, and she looked him squarely in the eyes. They were dark and brooding and held the hint of a challenge as he gave her a brief nod. It was as though he was waiting to see her recoil from him because of how he looked. "Just being neighborly, that's all," he muttered. She felt a powerful urge to tell him that, in time, the scars would fade. But she bit her lip, knowing it would be inappropriate. If Gabe and Walter were friends, which she hoped they were, she would mention it sometime in the future. "Would you like a glass of lemonade, Miss Butler?" Bethany hovered nearby, holding the little boy's hand. "We have a mirror inside if you would like to brush your hair as well." She beckoned Emma shyly, leading the way toward the cabin. "Are you Mr. Harrison's new bride? Pa told me he's getting married and that you have traveled all the way across the country on a train." She sounded awestruck, which Emma found rather touching. "I am, and it was worth the journey. What I've seen of Rocky River so far is so much nicer than where I used to live, and folks seem very friendly." A moment later, Emma peered into the small mirror that Bethany showed her. It was in the bedroom that Bethany shared with her little brother, who she introduced as Jonah. She quickly unpinned her hair and ran her fingers through it, loosening her tumbling brown curls before deftly coiling them up again into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. "Your hair is very pretty," Bethany said from the doorway. She sounded slightly wistful as she watched Emma secure the last strands with a tortoiseshell comb that had belonged to Rosalind. "Dusty is what it is," Emma said with a grin. "I'm looking forward to having a proper bath soon. I'd offer you some water to wash in, but Pa hasn't had time to fetch it from the pump yet. Our cabin is a little basic. It's just the three of us." Emma shook her head, feeling a surge of gratitude that the Baxter family had shown a complete stranger so much kindness. "It's not basic at all," she said hastily. "If you could have seen the tenement building where I used to live, your cabin is charming by comparison." "Really?" Bethany's eyes widened with curiosity. "I don't even know what a tenement building is, ma'am, but I do try to make our place cozy. One day I'll learn how to sew some patchwork quilts and make some cushions, like where we used to live when we still had Ma." She stopped abruptly as though she'd said too much. "Pa says going to school is more important than making the house pretty, but I prefer staying home with Jonah," she added quietly. "Your pa has a point," Emma replied. She sensed there was more the girl wanted to say, and she couldn't help but wonder how long it had been since Mr. Baxter had been widowed. "I used to work as a dressmaker. Perhaps I could help you learn to sew once I've settled in at the ranch?" "Oh, yes, please." Bethany's face was transformed by a radiant smile, but Emma suddenly realized she had no idea how far Walter's ranch was from town or how often they might come in to get supplies. The suggestion had just popped out of her mouth without her thinking. But for all she knew, Walter might not want her spending time on such things. Or, more to the point, Mr. Baxter might already have plenty of offers for help with his daughter from any number of young ladies in the town. A clock chimed in the living room, and Emma hastily drank the glass of lemonade Bethany had given her. "Well, let me check with your pa first. He might not be pleased if he thinks you should be in school." She checked herself in the mirror one last time, leaning forward to wipe a smudge of dust from her cheek. "I'd better get going. Walter has booked the pastor to marry us today, and we mustn't be late." As Emma hurried toward the wagon, she overheard the two men talking. "Are you sure you're feeling okay, Walter? You seem a little out of breath." "Sure. You fuss more than Ma, Gabriel. It's nothing, just those wretched cattle giving me the runaround this morning. Anyway, thanks for agreeing to fix these at short notice for me. I'll settle up with you tomorrow." Walter slapped Gabe on his shoulder, looking distracted. "No problem. Maybe you should take things easier until you've had a chance to see Dr. Mundy. Your ma's got a point. It's not right for a man like you to get so breathless. And if she thinks you should see the doctor, I'm inclined to agree." Walter shrugged. "There's no time to take it easy, not with all the plowing still to do. If I don't get the wheat sown in the next few weeks, I'll have no wheat to sell. You know how it is. Besides, things will be better now that I have Emma to help out." "Is everything okay?" Emma didn't want to admit she'd heard their conversation, but now that Gabriel had mentioned it, Walter's face did look a strange color. "Just Gabe fussing about nothing," he exclaimed. "Let's go. Pastor Franklin will be wondering where we've gotten to." He shot her an admiring glance as he helped her back up onto the wagon seat. Gabriel wiped his hands on a rag and gave her a small nod. "It was nice to meet you, Miss Butler. Enjoy your wedding, and see you around." Emma felt sorry to be leaving Baxter's forge so soon as she watched Gabriel returning to his anvil. Bethany seemed like a kind-hearted girl, and she had enjoyed the few minutes in their company. She hoped they were friends of Walter's and not just business acquaintances, so she could help the girl learn to sew. "All ready to get married?" Walter asked jovially. "I'm sorry that I didn't think to give you time to freshen up, but you can take all the time you need once we get home to the ranch." He flicked the reins and the horse broke into a trot. "I'm ready," Emma replied, feeling her stomach flip with nerves. She gave her fiancé a smile, feeling suddenly shy. "How far is it to the church?" "Not far at all." Walter lifted his hand to point, but then suddenly clutched his chest with a groan and slumped forward over his knees. As the reins went slack, the horse skidded to a halt in confusion. "Walter, what's wrong?" Emma tried to help him sit up, but his bulky frame was hard to maneuver. "Sit up? Shall I get help?" I can't breathe." Walter's words came out in ragged gasps, and he clutched his chest again as though seized by agonizing pain. "Walter, wake up! Don't die!" Emma heard the shrill scream from far away, and it took her a moment to realize that it had come from her. But it was too late. The light was already fading from her fiancé's eyes. Chapter 8. Gabe dropped his hammer and ran out of the barn at the sound of the scream, which split the air. He ran toward the wagon as fast as his limp would allow him, and as he reached the wagon, his worst fears were confirmed. "Walter's dead," Emma sobbed. "One minute he was talking to me just fine, and the next, he just collapsed in front of my eyes. I tried to help him sit up, but he was too heavy. Let me help you down and take a look for myself." Gabriel held his hand out and then steered Emma to the back of the wagon, so she wouldn't have to watch him examine Walter. He knew as soon as he saw the contorted expression on Walter's face that his friend had gone, most likely suffering some sort of seizure. He only wished Walter had listened to his ma's concerns and visited the doctor. Although realistically, he knew Dr. Mundy would probably not have been able to give him any medicine that would have prevented his untimely death. He gently closed Walter's eyelids and laid the rug which Walter had provided for Emma to sit on over him. The last thing he wanted was for any vultures to start circling overhead while he went for help. "There's nothing you could have done to save him," he said softly to Emma as he tucked her hand in the crook of his arm. "I'm going to take you back to my house, where Bethany will look after you, if that's all right. I'll need to fetch Dr. Mundy and Pastor Franklin. I expect they will want to take Walter's body to his ranch. It's where he would want to be buried." Emma stumbled to a stop next to him. "Poor Walter. He had such a zest for life. I can't believe what just happened." Her shoulders began to shake from the sobs that gripped her. "Hush now," Gabe said soothingly. "It's a terrible shock for you." He stroked her shoulder, the same way he would for a frightened animal, and his heart went out to her. He knew only too well what it felt like to be sucked into a dark pit of despair, and he wished he could take her into his arms to hold her until she felt better. The poor woman had only just arrived and knew nobody, which must be making everything even worse for her. "Nothing has gone right for so long," Emma murmured to herself. She pressed her shawl over her face, and her voice was muffled. "First losing Irvin to influenza, and now losing Walter, before we even had a chance to get to know each other properly. I thought coming out here was the path the Lord wanted for me. Maybe I've been wrong about everything." Gabe wasn't sure who Irvin was, but he recognized how hopeless Emma felt. He wanted to offer her some solace, but then wondered if he was in any position to do so because he knew he had barely gotten over Josephine walking out on him. But then he remembered how much the occasional kind word had helped him in those first dreadful weeks. "I know it feels like your world has come crashing down just now, but things will feel a little better soon, I promise you." His words seemed to have the desired effect as her sobs slowly subsided, and she dried her tears with the edge of her shawl. "You must think me very selfish to only be talking about my own sadness," she said quietly with a sniff. "Walter's poor mother will be devastated, I'm sure." She blinked rapidly as more tears threatened. "I don't think you're selfish at all. It's only natural to feel how you do," Gabriel assured her. "I expect it might feel strange mourning a man you've only known through letters. I can't offer any advice other than to try not to turn your back on the Lord. My faith has helped me get through difficult times in the past." Emma plucked the fringe on the edge of her shawl with a worried frown. "I feel like such a fool, thinking that I could run away from all my problems in Wilmington and miraculously lead a better life out west," she sighed. Fresh tears pooled in her eyes, and Gabriel's heart ached for her. A thought flickered through his mind. "I know what it's like to run away from heartache only to find it was still a part of me, like a shadow I couldn't escape from." His memories from leaving the mine, hoping for a fresh start, filled his head, but he didn't want to tell her that. It was the last thing she needed to hear right now. "Who will tell Walter's ma? I don't think it would be right coming from me. We've never met. We'll take care of everything." Gabe felt safer talking about practical matters. "Will you be happy to wait here with Bethany while I sort things out?" He checked again. Emma nodded and untied her bonnet absent-mindedly. The spring sunshine highlighted glints of copper in her brown hair, and without warning, he felt his breath catch in his throat. Was it seeing her looking so vulnerable, or the fact that it had been so long since he had stood next to a woman who intrigued him quite as much as she did? He didn't know, but he also didn't want to examine those feelings. It wouldn't be right for Emma or for him. "There's nowhere I'd rather be," she replied, looking up at him with a hesitant smile. "I don't know anyone else in Rocky River." Gabe felt a sense of relief that the worst effects of her terrible ordeal were passing. "Folks are friendly here. You'll soon see. You and Bethany have shown me nothing but kindness. You should be very proud of raising such a wonderful daughter as her." Gabe found himself smiling in spite of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Even after everything she had just been through, this unusual woman was thoughtful enough to pay him a compliment about Bethany. "She's a good girl. I'll get on now, and I promise I won't take too long. Please make yourself at home. We don't have much, but Bethany will be happy to give you some food while you wait." The next hour passed in a blur as Gabe saddled up his horse and quickly rode into the center of town to make the necessary arrangements. Thankfully, Dr. Mundy was not out on a visit and had just finished seeing the last of his patients for the day. He followed Gabe back to his property as soon as Gabe explained what had happened, via a detour to the church, where the pastor was just coming out of the church, wondering where Walter and his new bride-to-be had gotten to. "I told Walter to lay off the whiskey and rich food last time I saw him," the doctor said with a sorrowful shake of his head as they regarded his slumped body. "It's not that he was a drunk, but I could tell by his coloring that there was something not quite right. I've seen men like him have heart failure before. It can come out of the blue, and sadly, there's not much that can prevent it. I guess the only good thing I can say is that he wouldn't have suffered. It was quick, which I hope will give his mother some comfort." Pastor Franklin helped Gabe and Dr. Mundy lay Walter's body out in the back of his wagon and murmured a prayer for his departed soul. "Mrs. Harrison will want to have him buried on the ranch," the pastor said as he prepared to leave. "It will be a terrible shock for her and for the young lady he was meant to be marrying today as well." "Bethany's looking after Miss Butler," Gabe explained. He hadn't called her outside, thinking the day had already been distressing enough for her. "I'll come out to the ranch with you, Pastor." Dr. Mundy mounted his horse and picked up his reins. "She might take the news badly, and I want to leave a tonic to make sure she can sleep." He looked toward Gabriel's cabin. "If Miss Butler needs a tonic as well, bring her to my surgery tomorrow." He shook his head again. Such a terrible waste of a good man, but he's with the Lord now. Gabe unhitched Walter's horse and turned him out into his paddock with Coco and his gelding Prince, pausing for a moment to make sure his animals would accept the new arrival. The horses pranced around the paddock, kicking up dust and biting each other's necks for a moment before settling down to graze. He wondered what Walter's ma would do. She was getting on, and it would be a lot to live on the ranch alone with nobody to run the place. He figured she would probably sell up and move into town. It was a sad business all round, and he would miss Walter's visits to the forge. He was one of the few friends Gabe had in Rocky River, and had always taken it upon himself to keep Gabe's spirits up with tidbits of gossip from the district and his irrepressible enthusiasm for life. "I should take a leaf out of his book, huh, Coco?" he mused as the mare came up, hoping for a treat. Spend less time dwelling on the past and thinking about what Josephine did. Walter wouldn't have let something like that hold him back. It was starting to get dark by the time Gabe climbed the steps of his veranda and let himself into the log cabin. The smell of ham and dumplings made his mouth water, and he was surprised to see Emma stirring a pot on the range. "Papa home?" Jonah squealed with excitement and charged toward him on sturdy legs. It was a sight that never failed to fill his heart with joy, and he bent down and scooped the little boy up, swinging him in the air. "Papa home?" Jonah repeated. Gabe felt his little hands on his beard, and he nodded happily. "Uh-huh, Papa's finished outside for now." He shot Emma a wry smile. "Jonah's learning new words every day. I hope he hasn't exhausted you with his chattering." "Not at all. He's a very happy little boy," Emma said. "Miss Butler's been helping me cook dinner, Pa," Bethany announced. Her cheeks were pink from the heat of the range, but there was something else, too. Gabe realized it was the first time he had seen Bethany looking this happy in weeks, and he wondered what the two of them had been talking about. Gabe set Jonah down on the floor again. "You were meant to be resting," he said quietly to Emma. "Will you eat supper with us?" "I'm not hungry. I just did it so I could keep busy, and I figured you would be tired. Bethany has been telling me about Rocky River. It's been very helpful. I've gotten a better idea about what sort of businesses are here." It was such a cozy scene that, for a moment, Gabe almost forgot the reason why Emma was there until he noticed the violet smudge of shadows under her eyes. Clearly, she was exhausted, no matter what she said about wanting to keep busy. "Would you take Jonah and get him ready for bed, please, Bethany?" he said lightly. "Miss Butler and I have a few things we need to talk about." Once they were alone, he pulled a chair out for her at the table. "Please rest a moment, Miss Butler. You don't need to stand on ceremony with us." Emma nodded and collapsed into the chair. Her face was pale again in the flickering candlelight, and he could see it was taking all her willpower not to start crying again. "What will I do now?" she murmured. "I don't have enough money for the rail fare back to Wilmington. Not that I want to return to that stinking tenement again anyway. And I have nowhere to stay. So much for a new beginning." A choked sound came from her chest, halfway between a sob and laughter, and Gabe wondered if she might become hysterical. "I'm not laughing, really," she said, suddenly looking horrified at her reaction. "I just can't quite believe what's happened. A long time ago, I prayed for the Lord to show me a path for my future, but I never imagined it would be this. Might you consider staying at Walter's ranch with his ma?" Emma shook her head immediately. Walter let slip that his ma wasn't very pleased that he'd gotten himself a mail-order bride. He said she would come around to the idea once she got to know me, but I don't think I would be welcome now he's gone. She sighed, looking forlorn. "I really don't know which way to turn." Gabe poured Emma a cup of tea from the pot that Bethany had left in the center of the table. "How about not making any hasty decisions?" he suggested. "Do you have any money at all? I would be more than happy to escort you to one of the town's boarding houses. You could rest up for a few days and then make a plan. There's no need to rush into anything." Emma sipped her tea, and suddenly it was as if all the energy drained out of her, leaving her limp with weariness. She nodded slowly. "If you could suggest somewhere not too expensive, that would be one less thing to worry about." Mrs. Clatterbury trained me to be a useful seamstress back in Wilmington, so maybe I can find work for a few weeks while I figure things out. Of course, I'll help with whatever you want. Gabe saw the relief in her eyes and knew it had been the right idea to encourage her to stay for a while. Don't get attached to her. The thought slid into his mind like a warning alarm. Part of him had wondered whether to offer her work as his housekeeper so that Bethany could go to school again, like he wanted her to. But then he hastily pushed the idea aside. He barely knew the woman. And it would be confusing for Bethany and Jonah to start getting fond of her, only for it to end in her leaving. Besides, I'm not going to make that mistake again. He had a sudden memory of Josephine's cruel words in her note and, without thinking, touched the scars on his cheek. No, it certainly wouldn't do to get too fond of Miss Butler, no matter how much Bethany seemed to enjoy her company. "Drink up your tea, and I'll take you," he said, pushing himself up from the table again. "The Mistletoe Lodge boarding house does good rates, I've heard." "Mistletoe Lodge? I think that's where the two ladies I traveled on the stagecoach with are staying. We'd better leave right away, in case they don't have any room for you." He pulled on his coat, ignoring the confusion on Emma's face at his sudden need to get moving. He was feeling an unexpected tug of attraction to her, but couldn't afford to let his guard down. There was no reason for Emma to remain in Rocky River now that Walter had died. No doubt she would move on in a matter of weeks, just as soon as she'd saved up enough money for her fare. And even if he did feel a strange urge to want to protect her, it was not his place to do so, he told himself firmly. Chapter 9. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Olive and Cecilia Kemp hurried over to the breakfast table in the Mistletoe Lodge dining room, looking surprised to see her. "I thought you were marrying your fiancé yesterday afternoon as soon as we arrived," Olive continued. "We thought he looked very handsome and eager to get wed as quickly as possible." Emma put her knife and fork down and stood up to greet the two women. She hadn't realized how nice it would be to see their two friendly faces amidst so many strangers. "I'm afraid things didn't work out as planned. Sadly, Walter was ill, although he didn't realize it. His heart failed before we got to the church," she explained. It sounded shocking to hear it stated so plainly, but there was no other way to soften it. "Oh, my dear, what a terrible turn of events." The two ladies sat down next to her, and Emma was glad of their company. "You must let us look after you today," Olive said. She paused as Josie, the daughter of the boarding house owners, brought bacon and eggs to the table, along with a fresh pot of tea. For the duration of breakfast, Olive and Cecilia chatted about the journey and how pleasant the boarding house was, and Emma let their conversation wash over her. Much to her surprise, she had slept well after Gabriel had kindly arranged with the owners that she could stay for a week. It was a relief to let him make the arrangements after so long fending for herself, and by the time he had bade her good night and walked away into the darkness, she was beyond caring what happened. All she wanted was the oblivion of sleep. Louise Watkins and her daughter Josie had quickly prepared a room for her. It was small, and the furniture was plain, but the bed was comfortable. And she had woken up feeling refreshed as the sun filtered through the drapes and the birds chirped in the tree outside. She needn't have worried about staying there as a single woman. Louise had assured her that they had plenty of mail-order brides lodging with them. "It's what we're known for," she said cheerfully as she showed Emma to her room. "We have strict rules about not having male guests. There's plenty of room for them at the Black Crow Saloon and the hotel instead. We find it simpler that way." Emma was grateful the woman understood her predicament. "Would you care to join us for a walk through town after breakfast?" Cecilia asked, pulling Emma out of her thoughts. "Our cousin Gregory is fetching us in his wagon tomorrow to head out to his ranch at Winter Falls, so we have a little time to get to know Rocky River before we leave. We figured we should get some supplies like the stagecoach driver recommended. Gregory was never a good cook at the best of times," she added with a wry smile. As tempting as it sounded, Emma felt as though she needed some time alone because, although she had slept well, her mind was whirling with worries and doubts about her future. "If you don't mind, I'll take a walk through town myself later instead." I'm probably not very good company at the moment, as I have so much to think about. Louise had been kind enough to include breakfast and an evening meal in her board when Gabriel explained what had happened to Walter. Word traveled fast through the town because she had already heard from Edith, their cook, that Walter had died, but she hadn't realized that Emma had been left abandoned as a consequence of the terrible tragedy. But even with Louise's generosity, Emma knew that her meager savings would soon run out. She needed to make a plan, and fast. I might make a few inquiries to see if I could get employment somewhere. She didn't want to talk about her financial situation and was pleased that her companions didn't pry. Olive patted Emma's hand. We understand, my dear. You must do what you need, but we're here for you if you feel like company. A thoughtful look came over Cecilia's face. Do you think Cousin Gregory would be able to offer Emma some work? She asked her sister. Gregory runs his ranch alone, she explained to Emma. He's in his 60s like us, and has often talked about getting a housekeeper, but never did anything about it. We haven't decided whether we're staying in Winter Falls with him for good or returning back east, but we could ask him if you'd like us to. Once again, Emma was struck by people's kindness, and it made her feel slightly more optimistic about her future. That would be very kind. Perhaps I could think about it, she said. Josie bustled in and started clearing plates from the other tables. Did I hear you mention Winter Falls? If you're looking for work, I reckon you'll have more luck here in Rocky River, or back in Hudsonville. Emma remembered what the stagecoach driver had said about Winter Falls being a small place, little more than a one-horse outpost. As appealing as it was to try and secure some sort of employment as quickly as possible, she wasn't sure about settling somewhere so remote. Well, the offer's there if you need it, dear, Olive said with a warm smile. I'm sure a bright young woman like you will be a great asset to any business. It was another beautiful day as Emma wandered along the main street of Rocky River later that morning. She was surprised by how many folks were strolling outside and felt perfectly safe, as many of them were young women like her. From the snatches of conversations she overheard, it seemed like Rocky River was a popular place for mail-order brides to stay for a few days before getting married and traveling further west or onward to more rural outposts. As she walked past the park, she admired the pink blossom against the cloudless blue sky and wondered what God had in store for her. She had been so convinced that coming west had been part of his plan, and now she was over the initial shock of Walter's death. She realized that it was not her place to question what the Lord wanted her to do. She thought back again to the old woman by the river in Wilmington, who had told her to keep her heart open to God's wishes. Naively, she had thought it only applied at that moment in time. But now she realized it was the sort of wise advice she needed to bear in mind all her life. The memory brought a smile to her face. It felt like a lifetime ago, as so much had changed since that fateful day. Howdy, Miss Butler. The shout pulled her back to the present, and she saw Pete with the stagecoach up ahead. This time, it was facing the other direction, and she guessed he was about to set off to Hudsonville to collect the next new arrivals off the train. She waved as he tipped his hat and jumped down from his seat. I heard the terrible news about Walter, he said, shooting her a sympathetic smile. If you ever need to head back east, I'll happily give you a place on the stagecoach for free. Excuse us, ma'am. Two cowboys strode past, giving her lingering glances that made her blush, and Pete rolled his eyes. Have some manners, gentlemen. This young woman is far too ladylike for you. He waited until they had moved along, then turned back to Emma. As I was saying, you can travel back to Hudsonville anytime you want, and I won't charge you. Mind you, he continued, I'm sure it won't be too long until you get another offer of marriage if you're that way inclined. There are plenty of lonesome men around here, not to mention Mrs. Devereux's matrimonial agency at the other end of town, where you could take your pick of men looking to marry. Emma was surprised to find herself smiling at his advice, which sounded almost fatherly. She was quickly coming to understand that marriage on the frontier was as much about practicality as romance. It's far too soon for me to think about courting again, but I'm tempted to stay here for a little while. It seems like a pleasant town, and I can't face another long journey just yet. Of course, I don't blame you. But I'll keep your offer in mind if anything changes. Emma strolled on as two people approached the stagecoach to ask Pete what time he was leaving. Her attention was drawn to the window of the mercantile store nearby, which had a colorful display of candles, wooden toys, and pots and pans. She remembered her conversation with Bethany about teaching her to sew and decided to go into the shop to see if they had any scraps of fabric she could purchase cheaply that Bethany could get started with. Her hand paused over the doorknob as she hesitated outside. Would Gabriel think it was presumptuous of her to offer to teach his daughter how to sew? "Can I help you, my dear?" The door suddenly opened in front of her, and a plump woman in a striped apron looked up at her. "You're Walter's fiancée, aren't you?" It was a statement rather than a question, and Emma realized that all the locals had known Walter. Come in," the woman said, stepping aside. "I'm Ethel, and this is my husband, Elmer. We run the mercantile," she said with a hint of pride. I was his fiancée." Emma felt embarrassed as she saw two middle-aged women turn to stare, but then they nodded a polite greeting and turned back to the oil lamps they were examining. She sighed, feeling confused. She had only spent a couple of hours in Walter's company, and it felt almost fraudulent to refer to herself as his fiancée. In fact, if it hadn't been for his bundle of letters in her carpet bag, the whole thing could practically have been a dream. How could she call it a grand romance? It was more like a distant friendship that had never been given the chance to come to anything more. "We're sorry for your loss, and rest assured, we're not gossiping," Ethel said hastily. "It's a close-knit community here, and Walter has always played a large part in town, helping out with the summer fair and the Christmas carol service and the like. He'll be sorely missed." "Let the poor woman have a moment to herself to have a look around," Elmer said with a good-natured smile at his wife. He came out from behind the counter to arrange some boxes of cigars, and Emma saw Ethel pat him affectionately on the arm as she went past. "I was wondering if you have any scraps of fabric for sale? Mr. Baxter and his daughter very kindly took care of me after Walter." She hesitated, not liking to say the word. "When Walter was being taken back to his ranch by Pastor Franklin. I'd like to buy Bethany a little gift to say thank you, and she wants to learn to sew." "That's an excellent idea," Ethel said, nodding enthusiastically. "I have a basket of remnants out back. I'll fetch them for you now. They're very reasonably priced as well." Emma spent the next few minutes wandering around the store and between the cramped shelves, which were crammed with everything imaginable. Suddenly, the bell on the door tinkled, and a gray-haired lady hurried in. "Did Anthony's parcel arrive, Elmer?" the woman asked breathlessly. "He's been waiting weeks for that new fabric, and he's convinced himself that if our competitors in Hudsonville get their hands on it, all our customers will flock there to order their new suits. You know what he's like." Elmer chuckled. "Tell him not to panic, Harriet. It came late yesterday, and I've kept it safe under the counter for him." He dragged a sturdy parcel out. It was wrapped in brown paper and thudded on the countertop as he dropped it there. "I'll deliver it just as soon as I've served these customers. It's too heavy for him to carry." "Thank goodness for that. He's been bothering me for days about it," the woman said with a surprisingly loud laugh. "Business going well?" Elmer inquired. She harumphed and nodded, but looked worried. "Too good. But if it's not one thing, it's another. This morning, young Betty informed me that Roger proposed to her at long last yesterday evening, and that he's taking up a new job working for the railroad company in California, of all places. They're getting married tomorrow and heading on the first train west at the end of the week, if you can believe it. Just when I have all these dresses that need finishing, my apprentice dressmaker ups and leaves." She sighed loudly. "I don't suppose you happen to know whether any dressmakers are arriving in Rocky River any time soon?" Emma's hands trembled slightly as she heard the desperation in the woman's voice, and she peeked over the top of the shelf, wondering if she dared say anything. "I'm not sure," Elmer said, scratching his head. "Have you heard of anyone, Ethel?" "I can ask around, or perhaps," It might be worth speaking to Pete before he leaves for Hudsonville. He could put the word out to see if there's anyone just arrived who might be prepared to come to Rocky River instead. Good thinking. The woman turned to leave, and Emma knew if she didn't act now, it would be too late. Chapter 10. Emma took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the shelves that had hidden her. "Are you looking for a seamstress, ma'am? It's just Ms. That. I couldn't help overhearing what you said." Her words came tumbling out in a rush, and she hoped she wasn't about to make a fool of herself. "I used to work for a dressmaker called Mrs. Nolt in Wilmington before I came here. I don't claim to be the best, but I sure could use the work if you would consider me." "A dressmaker, you say?" Harriet Layton hesitated, and then broke into a wide smile of relief. "If you can start tomorrow, the job is yours. I'll give you a month's trial and a raise at the end if you're any good. I make gowns for the ladies, and my brother Anthony is a tailor, making suits for the gentlemen, but we'll probably start you off on mending and alterations. That's what Betty does for us. Does that sound good?" Emma nodded at Harriet, speechless with happiness. "Wonderful, thank you," she stuttered. "Well, isn't this a delightful coincidence?" Ethel exclaimed. "Elmer and I were worrying about what you would do, Miss Butler, when we heard the news of Walter's passing. But this new job is the perfect solution for you and our friend Harriet." "You'll find Anthony and Harriet very good people to work for," Elmer said. "I hope you weren't thinking about leaving Rocky River, Miss Butler. We need more young ladies like you to keep the town growing." "Well, that's all settled then," Harriet said. She eyed the scraps of fabric that Emma had picked out to give to Bethany. "Were you going to buy these? We have plenty of scraps in the shop, and I don't mind you taking what we don't need." "Yes." Emma felt slightly flustered by how quickly her fortunes were changing. "They are for a young girl called Bethany, not I promised I would teach her how to sew to thank her for looking after me yesterday." "Gabriel's daughter at the forge," Ethel chimed in by way of explanation for Harriet. "You can have these for nothing, my dear." Ethel gathered them into a pile and swiftly wrapped them up with a twinkle in her eye. "There you are. You can take them out to Baxter's forge straight away. Gabriel is a nice gentleman, and Bethany would benefit from a kind-hearted woman taking an interest in her," she added, letting her words hang in the air. Emma felt overwhelmed by how kind everyone was being toward her. "Thank you. I appreciate everything you've done." Harriet pointed across the road to show her where the dressmaker's shop was, agreeing that Emma would start at 9 o'clock the following morning. And a moment later, Emma found herself back outside in the sunshine again, with her parcel tucked under her arm. Her heart beat slightly faster at the thought of visiting Baxter's forge to deliver the fabric to Bethany as an image of Gabriel's dark eyes and broad shoulders floated into her mind. He intrigued her, but his sudden change in demeanor the night before was puzzling. One moment, he had seemed kind and caring, but the next, he had turned brusque and businesslike, as though he had regretted welcoming her into his home. One thing at a time, she told herself with an inward smile. She had taken matters into her own hands about finding employment, which gave her some comfort. But even though she was excited at the prospect of starting a new job, her mind kept pulling her back to Gabriel and his family. And she had to admit there was a part of her that wanted to get to know him better. She bustled round the corner and gasped as she was blinded by the sun and barged straight into someone. Two strong hands gripped her arms to stop her from falling over. "Miss Butler, mind yourself." The voice was deep and instantly recognizable. Emma glanced up into Gabriel's dark eyes, and her heart skipped a beat. She felt the blood rush to her cheeks as she experienced a shock of attraction toward him. She blinked and ducked her head, trying to regain her composure. Her emotions had caught her by surprise, even more so because they were in such stark contrast to what she had felt toward Walter, who she would have been married to by now if things had gone to plan. "Mr. Baxter, I'm sorry. I should have been looking where I was going," she stuttered. He bent down to pick up her parcel, which she had dropped. "Not to worry," he said with an easy smile. "Are they taking good care of you at Mistletoe Lodge?" "Yes, very good care. Louisa and her family have shown me nothing but kindness." She gave him a shy smile, still not quite sure how to gauge his mood after it had changed so rapidly the night before. She had the sense that he wanted to be friendly, but something was holding him back. What it was, she had no idea. "I was just thinking that I hadn't really thanked you properly for looking after me yesterday." She held up the parcel. "I have some pieces of fabric here for Bethany. I said I would teach her how to sew if that's all right. I know you're a busy man, and she does a lot about the house for you, so I don't want to do it without your agreement." Gabriel's eyebrows twitched upward, but his expression was hard to read. "We were just being neighborly. You don't need to thank us with gifts." He paused for a beat. "I'm sure Bethany will appreciate it, though," he added. "Well, I can assure you that none of my neighbors in Wilmington would have looked after me so well," Emma said quickly. "I really do appreciate your kindness, especially as Walter was your friend, too." He nodded and took his hat off, running a hand through his thick hair, which gleamed raven black in the sun. "I guess it wouldn't harm for you to spend a little time teaching Bethany how to sew," he shrugged. "Maybe you can even persuade her to go back to school again," he muttered to himself. "Only on one condition, though. You can thank me by not calling me Mr. Baxter. It's just Gabe to my friends. Mr. Baxter sounds far too formal." Emma felt her smile widen. "So he does consider me to be a friend." The thought made her surprisingly happy. "Well, thank you, Gabe, again. When would be a convenient time for me to deliver this fabric to Bethany? Sometime tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? Oh, I almost forgot. I've gotten myself a job working for Harriet and Anthony at the dressmakers." Emma almost had to pinch herself as she said it because she still couldn't believe she had managed to find work so easily. Gabe gave a low whistle, and his eyes glinted with amusement. "You sure don't hang around, Miss Butler. I admire that in you! How about coming after work in a couple of days? It will give you time to settle into your new job, and I'm sure Bethany will want to know all about it. Come for a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some errands to run." "Thank you. I'll see you in a few days, then." Another blush warmed her cheeks as Gabe tipped his hat and smiled. Even though he was only being friendly, the fact that he was pleased she was staying in Rocky River made her spirits lift. As Gabe walked away, Emma started to see Rocky River differently. Even though she felt sad about Walter's untimely passing, she no longer felt the dragging sense of defeat that it had been a bad decision to head west. Rocky River was a vibrant town, and she had experienced more friendliness and kindness from folks here within one day of arriving than she had known for all those months scraping by in Wilmington, other than Mrs. Knowlt's steady presence. She felt a sudden surge of optimism that perhaps she could make a life for herself out west after all. She had a job. She had a place to stay, as long as her wages were good enough. And even if she didn't get married, it felt like there were opportunities for a single woman in Rocky River. She turned and caught sight of Gabriel stepping into the office of the lumber merchant at the end of the street and couldn't help but smile. He didn't have to be kind to her, but he had been nonetheless. She could tell that he felt self-conscious about the scars on his cheek and wondered if that was why Walter had hinted that he kept himself to himself. But if being with Irvin had taught her anything, it was that she shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Truth be told, Emma had scarcely noticed the scars as she'd looked up into his dark eyes. Emma hummed cheerfully as Mistletoe Lodge came into view, and she spied Olive and Cecilia sitting under the weeping willow tree, sipping a cold drink each. She knew that in the privacy of her room that night, she would allow herself to think about the way her heart had skipped a beat under Gabriel's gaze. The unfamiliar sensation had been so unexpected that it had made her feel quite strange. She had never felt that way with Irvin, and definitely not with Walter. And Emma had always told herself that ideas such as love at first sight were fanciful nonsense. Yet she couldn't deny the way her pulse had quickened when Gabriel Baxter had steadied her with his strong hands on her arms. The powerful emotions had caught her off guard, and she barely knew him. "Hello, Emma. Come and try some of Louise's lemonade. It's delicious." Olive beckoned for her to join them. "Did you have a nice walk around town? You look like you have good news." Emma nodded and told them all about her unexpected meeting with Harriet at the Mercantile and that she had decided to give Rocky River a chance. As Olive and Cecilia congratulated her and started chattering about how charming they had found the town as well, Emma's thoughts drifted back to Gabe. There was something about him that had caught her imagination when she had least expected it. She wondered whether she might even dare to allow herself to dream that her future could lie with him. Chapter 11. Emma settled at her work table at Leighton's tailor and dressmaking store and paused for a moment to look around the workshop with a contented smile, noticing the way the diffused morning sun cast splashes of light on the scrubbed wooden floorboards. Harriet and Anthony were proving to be good employers, just as Elmer had told her. She had overlapped with Betty for a couple of days before Betty headed west to California with her new husband, which had been very useful and helped settle her nerves. Betty enthusiastically explained all about what she did, and Emma felt right at home from her very first day. The work was not dissimilar to what she had done with Mrs. Nolt, but if anything, this job was better as there was more variety. Her table was at the back of the workshop, next to a large window, which gave her plenty of natural light, and when she wanted to rest her eyes, she had a delightful view over Anthony's pride and joy, his rose garden out back. Now that she had been working there for almost 2 months, Emma had fallen into an easy rhythm with her days. To help supplement the money for her board at Mistletoe Lodge, she spent an hour before breakfast assisting Josie with the cleaning and doing any small sewing jobs that Louise needed. She liked to arrive at work earlier than her hours officially started so that Harriet and Anthony could see that she was serious about wanting to make the best of their kind offer to take her on. The aroma of coffee drifted through from the rooms upstairs where Harriet and Anthony lived above the shop, and a moment later, Harriet's footsteps clattering on the stairs announced her arrival, and she put a tray down with a cup of coffee for all 3 of them. Anthony doesn't like to pick up a needle until he's had at least 2 cups of coffee, Harriet had announced about her brother with a fond smile on her first morning there. It had taken Emma aback that she was included, but she was quickly learning that life at Rocky River went at a slower pace than the frenetic towns back east. Harriet and Anthony were complete opposites, but it worked well for the business. Harriet was plump, with a loud laugh, which often rang out when she was chatting with the nervous ladies who were asking her to make their wedding gowns. She managed to put them at their ease in no time, which was why the ledger was full of appointments, and Emma knew she would never be short of work. By contrast, Anthony was slight. He wore round glasses and spoke quietly, happy to let his sister deal with most of the customers. But that was not to say he took a back seat at work. Emma discovered that he had been a highly sought-after tailor in New York before they decided to travel to the frontier for a quieter life. He loved nothing more than making finely cut suits for the gentlemen out west, but also took just as much care and attention over altering a cowboy's dusty jacket. "Treat everyone like a king, and you'll never go far wrong," was his mantra, which Emma thought was a good philosophy to live by. "Are you happy to carry on working on Miss Peterson's gown?" Harriet asked, sipping her coffee. "Yes, I don't have much more to do. I just need to finish taking up the hem, and then I should be finished and ready to work on something else." Emma hastily finished her drink and selected a needle and thread. Anthony looked up from the large table, where he was cutting fabric to make a new suit for Mr. Grady, the town's mayor. "Don't forget what I talked about with you last night, Harriet." Harriet nodded as she strolled along the shelves where they kept all their fabrics and paused to pull out a bolt of sprigged muslin. She knew from experience there would be a rush of orders for summer gowns any day, and she wanted to get ahead. "Emma, I know you've only worked on women's clothes up until now, but Anthony was wondering whether you would be happy to help with occasionally sewing some of his gentlemen's outfits as well." "Suits?" Emma nodded hesitantly. "As long as you think I'm up to the task, I would be happy to do whatever you suggest." In Wilmington, there had always been a strict distinction between gentlemen's tailors and the dressmakers who worked with ladies. She figured that perhaps folks were a little more relaxed about such matters on the frontier. If something needed making, it had to be done. I just have one project in mind to start with, which is to make a new jacket, Anthony explained. The town elects a new deputy mayor each year to serve under Mayor Grady, and it's a tradition that we make them a new jacket to wear, which we present to them at the summer fair. Harriet and I thought it would be a nice way for you to feel part of the town. Emma could feel her cheeks turning pink with pleasure at the trust they were placing in her. Are you sure? That's a very great honor, Anthony. I really appreciate everything you are both doing for me to help me settle in. Harriet chuckled. We know a good seamstress when we see one, Emma, and we want to make sure that you're happy working for us. I have so many wedding gown orders coming in, and Anthony should be slowing down a little at his age. We think you'll do an excellent job of it, and you don't have to worry about measuring whoever gets the role. Anthony will do that. Emma was relieved to hear this final part. Even though she was used to fending for herself in the tenements of Wilmington, she still found the forthright way some of the cowboys behaved out west a little overwhelming after Irvin's courteous nature. The thought of measuring a gentleman she didn't know would have worried her for days, and she was glad that her part in the process would be very much behind the scenes. An hour later, Emma presented the gown she had been working on for Harriet to inspect. The cream silk felt cool under her fingers, and Harriet nodded approvingly as she looked at the tiny stitches, which were Emma's handiwork. You certainly have a talent for this, she said happily. Miss Peterson will be delighted, and better still, I'm sure she will tell all her friends. Emma carefully hung the gown up so it wouldn't get creased and returned to her table, glowing at the praise from Harriet. She pulled a muslin dress from the rail behind her table and looked at her bobbins of cotton to see which color would match. How is young Bethany coming along? Harriet asked casually as she started sewing at her own table. Very well. Emma smiled at the mention of the girl. She's so eager to learn. It's a delight teaching her. I'm going to visit her this evening, as it happens. Maybe she gets her creativity from Gabriel. Anthony gave her a shrewd look from under his bushy eyebrows. He made me that metal rose trellis in the garden. In fact, I was thinking he would be a good choice to become our deputy mayor. Don't you agree, Harriet? I certainly do. He's just a sort of upstanding gentleman who would be good for that position. She glanced in Emma's direction. It's just a shame he seems kind of reserved. I hear he wasn't like that before his accident. Perhaps you could persuade him to put himself forward for it, Emma? Oh, I'm not sure about that. Emma tried not to look too shocked at their suggestion. Even though she didn't see much of Gabriel when she visited Bethany, she didn't think he would ever want to become deputy mayor or have a role like that. Prosody percent. It would mean being out in public more, and as much as she thought she had a lot to offer the town, she knew he liked to keep himself to himself. I guess I could mention it, she said hastily, not wanting Anthony and Harriet to think she was being obstructive. I just don't know that he would like to push himself forward for public office. You could plant the seed of the idea, Anthony said casually, as though it was of no consequence. I got to know him better when he was making my rose arch. He's a kind-hearted gentleman. It seems a shame that he hides away at the forge just because of his scars. Most folks don't notice that sort of thing anyway, once they get to know someone. As Emma walked to Baxter's forge later that day, her spirits lifted as she saw Gabe brushing Coco down just outside his barn. The saddle was resting on the top rail, and there was sweat on the mare's neck and where the cinch had been. How's her training going? Emma asked. She still felt rather nervous around horses and cautiously walked closer. Gabe straightened up and grinned, rubbing the mare's neck soothingly. She's going to make a fine horse for riding soon. I can't believe how much she's changed since I first took her on. She was skin and bone and scared of her own shadow, but now she's completely different. That's thanks to your hard work and patience, Emma said. She smiled as the mare snuffled Gabe's pocket and he pulled an old carrot out. Want to give it to her? He asked, passing it to Emma. She held her hand flat, as Gabe had shown her, and Coco daintily picked the carrot off her palm and then crunched it loudly. She's taken a liking to you, Gabe commented with another smile. I had thought to give her to Bethany, but I've noticed that Coco always comes over to the fence when she sees you arriving. An old fellow I used to know at the mine who broke horses in always said horses choose their owners, not the other way around. I'm not sure I'd have much need for a horse living at Mistletoe Lodge. She felt a pang of regret. Learning to ride had been part of her dream of living with Walter out at the ranch, but it looked like it wasn't to be. Who says you'll be there forever? Gabe said lightly, I guess Walter would have taught you to ride, huh? He waited for Emma's nod. Well, seeing as how Coco seems to have chosen you, perhaps I could teach you one day? He picked up his brush and ran it over Coco's flanks in long strokes, which made the mare sigh softly as she relaxed under his hand. Emma felt the color rise to her cheeks, but Gabe had turned away, so she couldn't read his expression. You're already so busy, I wouldn't want to add to your work. Bethany needs to learn, so you may as well do it with her. But if you're not interested, that's fine. Gabe's reply was short, and Emma hoped she hadn't offended him. No, that would be lovely. I just didn't want you to feel obliged because things didn't work out with Walter. Emma was gabbling, but she never quite knew whether Gabe was just being friendly or there was more to it. Why would there be more to it? It's probably just because I've been helping Bethany. That's all. Emma shook her head slightly, feeling momentarily irritated with herself, and the way her heart kept leading her back to this man who was so self-contained. He had never given the slightest indication that he liked her, other than as an acquaintance who was helping his daughter. And after losing a husband and a fiancé by the age of 22, Emma knew she should give up on the idea of a handsome man sweeping her off her feet. Maybe it worked for other young ladies, but not her, she told herself firmly. Miss Butler. Look, I've been practicing what you showed me last time. Bethany stood on the veranda and waved a colorful cotton handkerchief at Emma. She looked so happy and proud of herself that Emma couldn't help but smile. Didn't I say you would pick it up in no time? Emma walked toward her, her thoughts already turning toward what she would teach her this time. The sound of Gabe clearing his throat behind her made her hesitate. We were wondering if you'd like to eat dinner with us tonight, he said gruffly. Just as a sort of thank you, he added. She's enjoying the lessons, and you said you didn't want to be paid, so a meal is the least we can do. Emma's heart lifted with sudden joy, and she nodded eagerly. I'd like that very much. I brought a chocolate spice cake that Edith let me make this morning, so we could have that for dessert. That's sorted then. Gabe's dark eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled back at her. Bethany and Jonah will be pleased. They like having you around. Emma wasn't sure whether he meant that as a compliment or not as she walked up the veranda steps and put her basket on the table. Does that mean Gabe's pleased as well? Before she had a chance to consider it, Jonah came charging toward her with his arms outstretched, giggling with excitement, followed by Dash hopping along on his 3 legs. And the moment was forgotten. The dinner was a great success. Bethany had made rabbit pie with mashed potatoes and vegetables, and Jonah's eyes rounded with excitement as she carried the food to the table, making them all laugh. I declare, that's the best cake I've ever eaten. Gabe sat back in his chair at the end of the meal and patted his stomach as Emma poured out the coffee. It was a recipe my wonderful mama taught me before she died. I don't have much to remember her by, but things like that help, Emma said without thinking. As soon as the words had left her mouth and she saw Bethany's face fall, she wished she could snatch them back. Gabe stood up abruptly, his chair scraping on the floorboards. I just need to go outside to check that I remembered to shut the gate, he muttered. I'm sorry, Bethany. That was thoughtless of me, Emma said quietly as the cabin door slammed behind Gabe. In all her visits to Gabe's home, Bethany had never mentioned her ma since that first day when Emma had been brushing her hair to get ready for her wedding. Emma reached across the table and squeezed Bethany's hand, wanting to make amends. I brought a book with me that I thought you might enjoy reading. Would you like to see it? Bethany's expression had been troubled, but now she smiled again. That's very kind of you, Miss Butler. Pa says I should go back to school, but I ain't so sure. Some of the boys say mean things about the way Pa looks, and when I told the teacher, they said I was making it up. Emma pulled the book from her basket and gave it to Bethany. It had come from Irvin's modest library, one of the few things she had been able to rescue from the house before the bailiffs emptied it to pay his debts. "It's a book of Greek myths. I hope you enjoy it." She watched as Bethany eagerly turned the pages. Now it made sense why Gabriel had muttered to himself that he wanted Bethany to go back to school. She wished there was more she could do, but the truth was Bethany was practically old enough to have finished her schooling anyway. "Maybe I could bring some more books with me next time," she suggested. "That sounds like a good idea," Gabe said from the doorway. Emma hadn't heard him return, and her heart jumped again, as it always did when she saw him. "I have more books at the boarding house, and I noticed there's a public library in town as well." Gabe's eyes softened as he watched Bethany, who had taken the book to sit by the fire and was reading quietly under her breath. "You seem like you've had a good education. I'd be very grateful for anything you could help Bethany with. I don't believe in girls not being worthy of a good education, not like some men do." Emma was relieved that his mood had brightened again. She wondered how long ago his wife had died and whether she might ever pluck up the courage to ask him. Given that her mentioning her own ma's death had caused him to react so strongly, she guessed he still found it difficult to hear anything which reminded him of his wife's passing. "I'd be very happy to help Bethany any time. My first husband, Irvin, was much older than I was, and he encouraged me to read as many books as I wanted. If I can pass any of what I learned on to Bethany, it would be a pleasure. She's a bright girl, and it's a shame that the teacher didn't support her better, but it's not too late for her to learn more." Gabe gave her a long look, as though weighing up whether she meant it or not, and then nodded. "Thank you." A sudden gust of wind rattled the door, and he glanced toward it. "I meant to say the weather changed while we were having dinner. It looks like there's a storm brewing, so I'll walk you back to Mistletoe Lodge. It's not the sort of night for a young woman to be out alone, and Bethany needs to put Jonah to bed now." He picked up his hat, making it clear that the evening was over. Emma stood up hastily, once again, feeling unsure of herself. Gabe's company had been easy during the meal, and he had entertained them all with stories of when he learned to ride as a boy, as well as tidbits of entertaining conversation about some of the folks in town. Watching his dark eyes grow animated and his ready smile as he relaxed had given Emma a glimpse of the real Gabe beneath his cool exterior. It was as if he had built a wall around himself, convinced that his scars defined him, but the evening had taught her that it wasn't true. Under his reserved demeanor, there was a kind-hearted, thoughtful, interesting man who enjoyed people's company. If only he would let his guard down, she thought to herself. Bethany hurried away with Jonah, and Emma tidied the last couple of plates from the table. "It has been the most delightful evening, Gabe," she said softly. Gabe picked up her shawl from the coat hooks behind the door and held it out for her. Their fingers brushed as she reached for it, making her pulse quicken. "I enjoy being in your company, and your children are a great credit to you." Yet again, the words had left her mouth before she could stop them, and her cheeks colored as she wondered what had come over her. There was something about being in Gabe's company that made her want to speak what was in her heart. "Let me help you with that," Gabe said as her shawl snagged on her brooch. He stepped closer and unhooked it, and Emma could feel the heat between them. She found herself looking up into his dark eyes, noticing the flecks of hazel that caught the lamplight and the breath caught in her throat. Instead of looking away, he held her gaze, and for one dizzying moment, Emma wondered if they might kiss. But then, a sudden clap of thunder overhead broke the moment. "We'd better get going," he muttered, stepping away from her. He turned away and pulled his coat on. "I'm glad you enjoyed the evening," he added. "We're getting kind of used to you being here. I like it." His last words were so quiet that Emma wondered if she had misheard. But before she had a chance to say anything, the first drops of rain pattered on the cabin's roof, and Gabe was holding the door open for them to leave. Chapter 12. Gabe turned his face upward, enjoying the cooling rain on his skin in the dusk. It had been dry for almost a month, and the farmers desperately needed the rain, but as was often the way, it was all or nothing. Too wet? or too dry. This storm would help bring new growth to the crops and grasslands, and the ranchers would be relieved to know they wouldn't go without winter fodder for their animals. He slowed his pace, noticing that he had gotten too far ahead of Emma, who was hurrying to catch up with him. It made him realize how long it had been since he had walked with a woman by his side, how long it had been since he'd enjoyed the simple pleasure of the company of a woman who lifted his heart. The storm rumbled in the darkening skies around them, 1 minute seemingly far away, the next almost overhead. Clouds the color of slate were scudding across the sky, and the birds had fallen silent. "I meant what I said about being grateful for the help you're giving Bethany," he said as she fell into step next to him. "She's starting to blossom again after having those struggles at school." He wanted to tell Emma how much he worried about Bethany not having her ma in her life anymore, but something held him back. If he went down that route, the conversation could get dangerous. He would have to explain why it was just the three of them and that he had not been enough for Josephine. The words were on the tip of his tongue, but out of habit, he didn't want to take the risk of opening his heart to her in case she, too, found him lacking. "Bethany's stronger than you think," Emma said, giving him a reassuring smile. Her tone was kind, not as if she was trying to tell him that he didn't know his own family's needs. "I understand you want what's best for her. It's only natural, and it's hard for someone her age to understand how final death is. Losing a parent is difficult, no matter how old we are." Gabe stopped in his tracks. "Does she think Josephine died?" He shook his head slightly, knowing that he couldn't let Emma continue under this misconception, no matter how painful it was going to be to explain the truth. He hadn't deliberately wanted to mislead her, but now he could see that it had always been easier for him to let her believe he was widowed. "It wasn't death Bethany had to come to terms with," he muttered, crossing his arms defensively across his broad chest. Emma's eyes widened with surprise. I'm sorry. It's just that when I mentioned about my ma dying, I noticed that Bethany looked upset. I must have gotten it all wrong." In the gathering dusk, Gabe could see confusion and puzzlement on her face. "I've never really told you how I got these scars," he said haltingly. His hand went to his cheek automatically, and he felt the roughness of his skin against his palm. "You might have heard rumors in town, but I'd rather tell you the full story myself." He waited for a beat, and Emma stepped a little closer. "You don't have to tell me if it's too painful. I like you regardless of the scars, Gabe." He hesitated, knowing there was no going back once he had started. He had never told anyone the full story, not even Walter. But there was something about Emma's trusting green eyes and the way she never looked away from his scars that made him feel that now was the time to bare his soul. "It all started when we had a new deputy manager at the mine. I thought Josephine was happy, but she never really took to Jonah when he was born. After we had Bethany, she said she didn't want any more children, but I always longed to have a son. Then, when Jonah came along, she seemed kind of restless. I hoped that it would pass, but deep down, I knew that she resented me for being happy about having our little boy, and that she thought I'd trapped her." Emma reached out and laid her hand on his arm for a brief moment, and it gave him the courage to continue. "Not long after Jonah was born, we were working in a new section of the mine, and it had been hot for weeks. Everything was tinder dry, and a campfire got out of control. The manager had gotten lazy about keeping the grass clear from where the dynamite was stored, and there was an explosion. I was one of the lucky ones," he said, shaking his head. "The 2 men I was working with lost their lives that day." Gabe felt his heart thud with shock as a streak of lightning lit up the dark sky, and a clap of thunder drowned out his voice. Even knowing it was just an early summer storm, he still struggled with unexpected loud noises. It reminded him too much of that terrible explosion that had killed his 2 friends. "It must have been difficult for you," Emma said, looking up at him with a kind smile once the thunder had subsided again. "Dealing with your own injuries would be bad enough, but knowing that your friends died, leaving families behind, must have made it worse." He nodded. "Yes, I felt guilty that I survived." The memories flooded into his mind, and Gabe took a deep breath, fearing that he might be dragged back to those dark days. He had tried to avoid thinking about it for so long, but being with Emma made it feel possible to confront them. She had shown him more understanding in one comment than Josephine had ever managed. "I was fortunate that the doctor took good care of me," he continued. "But Josephine couldn't bear to look at me. She cried when my bandages came off and said my face would always remind her of everything she had lost." His words came out in a rush, and he paced back and forth, suddenly feeling that he needed to get everything off his chest. She was right, and I don't blame her. She always cared about her appearance, and then she had a husband who looked broken, ugly. He knew his words sounded harsh, but he couldn't stop. She waited for a few weeks and tried to believe in our future. But I knew it was too late. Josephine wasn't the sort of woman who could accept change or failure. The rain was coming down harder, but Gabe hardly noticed it. He thought back to the pain of those last few weeks at the mine, and he felt something shift deep within him. It was as if the Lord was sending the rain to cleanse him from his sorrows and wash away his memories at last. "She ran away with the deputy manager at the mine," he said, raising his voice to make himself heard over the rising wind. "She left a note saying she deserved better, and she wished me happiness in the future." He turned to Emma and seized her hands, needing to know something. "How can a mother do that, Emma?" Bethany was crushed. She thought she'd done something wrong, the poor child. "But it was me who did something wrong. I ruined everything by looking like this." He gazed into her green eyes, waiting to see revulsion or even pity. But instead, she lifted her hands and placed them gently on his cheeks. "You did nothing wrong, Gabe. She just didn't have it within her to cope with so many changes. Maybe the Lord brought you together so you could have those wonderful children, Bethany and Jonah, and he knew that you were a good enough pa 10 times over to raise them well. How can you be so understanding?" Gabe was practically rendered speechless by the way Emma had suddenly helped him see everything differently. He wasn't the failure Josephine had led him to believe, and Bethany would be just fine. More than fine. He was getting by okay with his family, and it had taken Emma's kindness to help him see it. "Someone once told me we have to open our hearts to see the Lord's path," Emma said softly. "I have to remind myself of it often, but it's something to live by, don't you think?" Gabe nodded. He could feel his emotions swelling in his chest, choking him. "Open our hearts, huh? I think I stopped doing that after the explosion and thought I wouldn't be able to again, but maybe that isn't true anymore." He was suddenly aware of the sound of horses approaching in the gloom. It was Sheriff Jackson with his deputy. "You'll catch your death of cold standing out in the rain like that, Gabe," he called, tipping his hat. "Heading back to the boarding house, are you, ma'am?" Gabe sprang back from Emma. The last thing he wanted was for rumors to spread that might sully her reputation. "Gabe is kindly walking me back, Sheriff," Emma called. "Your new jacket for the summer fair is almost finished, by the way." The sheriff pulled his horse to a halt. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll be in to fetch it tomorrow. That reminds me, I'm taking names for the new deputy mayor to help Mayor Grady for a year. I reckon it would be perfect for you, Gabe, and I'm not the only one thinking it. Be sure to throw your name into the ring. It's about time you played a bigger part in the town. We need good men like you." Gabe watched the two men trot away on their horses in astonishment. "I've never heard such a crazy suggestion in all my life," he muttered. "What would Mayor Grady want with a deputy like me?" "Don't say that." This time, Emma's voice was firm, with an edge of sharpness. "What Sheriff Jackson said is perfectly true. You are a good man, Gabe, even if you can't see it yourself. Harriet and Anthony suggested that you should put your name forward to be the deputy mayor as well. It's not just the sheriff who thinks you have a lot to offer the town. I've heard lots of people say good things about you and how helpful you are." She sounded frustrated and stood in front of him with her hands on her hips. "You don't understand, Emma, the way I look. Some folks just can't help but find it repulsive. I'm sure that isn't the sort of response that Mayor Grady is looking for from a deputy now when he needs help with town matters." He watched the different emotions chasing across Emma's face as they started walking again. Annoyance, disbelief, and finally, The corners of her mouth lifted into a smile. Maybe folks were like that when you first arrived in Rocky River, but I promise you, I've only ever heard people speak about you positively. I overheard one family saying that you saved their crops by mending their tools so quickly, and a couple of cowboys who said you shod their horses better than anyone they had ever used before. But that's just my job. Gabe was equal parts exasperated and baffled that she didn't see the problem with how he looked. I just like to be helpful, the same as anyone would be. Mistletoe Lodge came into view, and Emma stopped in her tracks and turned round to face him. She took a deep breath, and for one terrible moment, Gabriel thought he had gone too far, and she was angry. It was the last thing he wanted, but he had to make her understand. You might think me forward for saying this, but you have become a very dear friend, so I have to speak what's in my heart. Emma's tone was kind but firm. I've gotten to know you since visiting Bethany, and I believe in you, Gabe. It's time to let go of the past and what Josephine did. Trust that the Lord will forgive you, and forgive yourself, Gabe. The accident wasn't your fault, and you owe it to Bethany and Jonah to stop blaming yourself and hiding away. Gabe felt a warm glow of happiness spread through him as he started to tentatively consider that perhaps Emma was right. You sure do speak your mind, he said, chuckling. Maybe it is time to stop punishing myself because I never considered the effect it's having on the children. He thought about Bethany and Jonah's sweet faces and felt a sudden need to run home and hug them and tell them everything would be all right. So you'll put your name forward like Sheriff Jackson said? I guess I could think about it, he said slowly. This time, Emma's eyes sparkled with amusement as she nodded approvingly. Anthony has asked me to sew the jacket for the new deputy mayor. I'd feel happier knowing it was going to be you wearing it. She laughed, and the sound filled Gabe with happiness. He wanted to hear her laugh more, he realized. I was kind of worried about it being a gentleman I didn't know, she added, although Anthony will be doing the measuring, of course. Well, I guess you'd better get into the boarding house and dry off. Gabe bade her farewell and started walking away, his mind swirling with everything which has just taken place. It seemed remarkable to him that this young woman, who he had only known for a few months, had helped the scales to fall from his eyes with her kind demeanor and steady friendship. Suddenly, he stopped. If tonight was about honesty, he had to admit that he didn't think of Emma as just a friend. He wanted to sweep her into his arms and tell her he had fallen in love with her. He wanted to know that they would grow old together. He turned around and ran back to Emma, who had just reached the front gate. There's something I need to tell you. You're a wonderful woman, Emma. I owe you so much. You'll never know how much you've changed my life. His words trailed off as he wondered whether he had said too much. Emma blushed and looked up at him with her bewitching green eyes. Thank you. It's not all down to me, though. You just needed to be reminded of the kind of man who used to be, that's all. Good night, Gabe. He felt his heart thud in his chest as he watched her slip away, and the front door closed behind her. Do I dare tell her that I love her? Is there a reason why Emma came into my life when she did? The thoughts crowded into his mind, but he had no answers. As he turned to walk home, he watched the lightning flickering across the sky in the distance, where the storm was heading toward the mountains, and turned his face upward. Lord, forgive me for the things I have gotten wrong in the past. Please guide me on how to be a good pa for Bethany and Jonah, because I truly want the best for them. And if it is your will for Emma to play a bigger part in our lives, please give me the courage to tell her how I feel. Amen. For the first time since he had arrived in Rocky River, Gabe felt a newfound sense of lightness in his heart. This was his home, and this was where his family would grow up. And if putting his name forward to become deputy mayor was part of God's plan, he would follow that path with a happy heart. Chapter 13. Emma snipped the final thread on the new jacket with a satisfied sigh. It was made from black fabric to be practical, but was lined with dark blue silk and had a row of silver buttons down the front to be dressy enough for the occasion. It wasn't every day Rocky River had a new deputy mayor, after all. She laid it flat on the table and brushed a piece of lint off it. Her hands lingered on the jacket. And she allowed herself a moment to imagine what it would look like on Gabe and what it would feel like to rest her hands against his muscular chest when he was wearing it. "That looks just perfect. Well done, Emma." Anthony beamed as he came over to her table. "I knew it was the right thing to do, asking you to sew it. Wait until everybody sees Gabe wearing it at the summer fair. There will be plenty more gentlemen wanting a jacket just like it. You mark my words." He picked it up and placed it on a coat hanger, ready for the final fitting, which was happening shortly. Emma pulled a gown from her mending pile. As much as she wanted to sit and daydream about Gabe, she had work to get on with. Besides, she thought, with a disappointed sigh, it seems like she and Gabe were only ever destined to be friends and nothing more. As she started turning up the hem of the gown, her thoughts drifted back to that stormy night a month earlier. Her heart ached as she recalled the way that Gabe's face had been etched with pain as he revealed his past to her, and how she had longed to press her lips against his and kiss his sorrows away. Secretly, she had hoped that the evening might herald the start of something deeper between her and Gabe. But even though she still visited Bethany 3 times a week to help with her homeschooling, Gabe had maintained a polite distance ever since. Friendly, but not with the closeness she yearned for. She shivered as she thought about how much she had longed to be held in his arms, remembering how, for one heart-stopping moment, she had thought he was going to kiss her. She had been so sure, but now she figured she must have misread the situation. "I must be grateful to have Gabe as a friend," she thought to herself. "If I'm not meant to be with him, it must be because it's not what God wants." She sighed, wishing it could be different, but then pushed her longings away. There was no point hankering after something that wasn't to be. She had already learned that the hard way. The bell on the shop door tinkled, and her heart skipped a beat as Gabe stepped in from the street. His raven black hair was swept back, and he smiled as soon as he saw her. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by earlier than we agreed, Anthony. I had some errands to run, so I figured I may as well come and do the fitting while I'm here." Anthony ushered Gabe into the dressing room before she had a chance to say hello, and a moment later, Harriet strolled into the shop with a parcel under her arm. She unwrapped it on her table, humming cheerfully. "What do you think of this new delivery, Emma? Come and see. I had it sent specially from New York to make a wedding gown for a new client. Isn't it lovely?" Emma stood up and walked over to Harriet's table, glad to stretch her legs. The fabric was cream silk, and there was a separate piece of intricately woven lace next to it. Emma stroked it, feeling the exquisite weight of it and how it felt cool to the touch. "It's beautiful. Whoever gets to wear that will be very lucky, especially with someone as skilled as you making the gown." She wondered for a moment if Harriet might let her sew some of it, but dismissed the idea. She usually liked to do wedding gowns herself, especially with material as expensive as this looked. "I thought you would like it," Harriet replied, turning toward her with a smile. "It's for a special customer from out of town. I'm really going to enjoy making this gown for sure." She packed the fabric away again and looked up as Gabe stepped out from behind the curtain. "It's a perfect fit," Anthony said, walking around Gabe and tweaking the jacket on his broad shoulders to make sure it was sitting right. Gabe coughed and shuffled his feet slightly. Emma could tell he was feeling self-conscious under everyone's gaze, but she noticed with a swell of happiness that he no longer tried to turn his head away to hide his scars. "It sure does feel mighty grand. I've never had anything this smart before." "Well, it's all thanks to Emma's hard work," Anthony said quickly, giving her a proud look before holding a mirror up for Gabe to see how it looked from every angle. "It was definitely our lucky day when she overheard Harriet in the mercantile saying we were looking for a new seamstress." He helped Gabe take it off again and handed him his regular jacket, which was still dusty from where he had been working that morning. Emma felt her cheeks coloring as Gabe approached her table. "It really is a very fine garment," he said. "I have Mrs. Nolt and Harriet to thank for teaching me how to sew," Emma replied, wanting to deflect his compliment. She wasn't used to receiving such praise, and it left her feeling flustered. Bethany is cooking a special dinner tonight to celebrate me being chosen to be the deputy mayor. Would you like to join us? Gabe slipped his hands into his pockets and watched the birds fighting over crumbs just outside the window, sounding casual as though he didn't mind either way. It's to thank you for everything you have helped her with as well, he added. We have a small present to give you, so shall we say 6 o'clock? If you're not busy. His dark eyes met hers, and she felt the familiar pitter-patter of her heart beating faster whenever she was near him. As much as she wanted to tell herself she was happy that they were just good friends, her body said differently. That would be lovely, and your new position is definitely worth celebrating. She busied herself with her mending as he left the shop, hoping that Anthony and Harriet wouldn't notice the way she blushed in Gabe's presence. Harriet sidled up to Emma's table as soon as the door had closed. He's a charming gentleman, don't you think? We're very glad you were able to persuade him to offer his services to the mayor. He must think highly of you. Oh, it wasn't down to me, Emma said hastily. Sheriff Jackson suggested it, and I agreed with him. I'm sure it was the sheriff's words that persuaded Gabe. Harriet gave Emma a knowing smile. I think you underestimate yourself, my dear. Gabriel Baxter is like a different man when he's with you. You're very well suited. Her words hung in the air as Anthony nodded in agreement with his sister. Emma knew they had gotten the wrong idea and that she needed to quash the rumor before it gathered momentum and ended up making her look like a fool. Gabe and I are just good friends, she said firmly. She picked her mending up again and glanced toward the cream silk that Harriet had just shown her. Without warning, she felt a wave of sadness at the thought that she might never marry again or have children. She had hoped that there could be more between her and Gabe, but it was starting to feel less likely with each day that passed. Suddenly, the shop door flew open, and Reggie, the ginger-haired boy who helped out at the post office, came scurrying in. A letter for you, Miss Butler, he cried. Clearly, he had been practicing, and it made Emma smile. He rummaged in the satchel, which was slung over his shoulder, and slapped a letter on her table, giving her a grin. The boss lets me go out delivering letters now, he explained rather unnecessarily to them all. His snub nose was covered in freckles, and he pulled his hat lower on his brow. Ma said I'll be as red as a beetroot by the end of my round, but I'm not worried about a bit of sun. I'll be back as soon as I have a letter for you, Miss Layton, he said, giving Harriet another grin. He darted back out of the shop, and Emma picked up the letter, wondering who on earth it could be from. She looked at the postmark. Wilmington. Her heart sank as she opened it with trembling fingers. Had the landlord tracked her down to demand some backdated rent money? A few minutes later, she sat back in her chair, and Harriet shot her a look of alarm. Are you okay, Emma? Is it bad news? You look like you might faint. Emma shook her head, still feeling too stunned to speak. She took a sip of water from the glass on her table and looked at the letter again. She had to tell Harriet it was only fair. It's from Mrs. Nolt, of all people. I wrote to tell her about what happened to Walter and that I was working here with you. She's decided it's time for her to retire, and she has offered for me to take over the business from her, if I would like to. Emma could barely keep the shock out of her voice. If this had happened before she had decided to come to Rocky River, she would have jumped at the chance, but now she felt torn. An opportunity to take over an established business like Mrs. Nolt's would probably never come again, but it would mean leaving Rocky River just as she had started to feel as though it was her home. That's a surprise, Harriet said. She glanced toward Anthony, who looked troubled. It would be a great shame to lose you, but of course, you must do what you think is right for yourself. Do you think you would like to live in Wilmington again? Emma stood up, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. I love it here. I really do. And you and Anthony have been so kind to me. But she paced back and forth, not knowing whether she should admit what was really troubling her. It's just that I have good friends here, friends like Gabe, but I'm not sure if that's enough. I came to Rocky River expecting to marry, but if I am to stay a single woman, perhaps my future lies elsewhere. As she spoke, Emma had the strongest sense that if Gabe were to meet someone else, it would break her heart. Harriet hurried over and rested her hands on Emma's arms with a look that was hard to read. Don't rush into anything too quickly, Emma. That would be my advice. Take a few days to think about it. I'm sure Mrs. Nolt won't mind waiting a little while to hear back from you. It's a big decision and not one to make lightly. She glanced toward the clock in the corner of the shop. Why don't you take the rest of the afternoon off? You've worked hard these last few weeks, and it will give you more time to get ready to go to Gabriel's for dinner. Anthony opened the door for her with a kind smile. You'll always have a job here, no matter what you decide. He paused for a beat. Bethany sure would miss you if you left. And Gabe and little Jonah too, I expect. The shadows were just beginning to lengthen as Emma walked up the drive to Baxter's forge. There was a soft breeze rippling the long grass in the meadows, and birds swooped overhead, calling to each other on the wing. She could see the sunlight glinting on the stream which wound through Gabe's property, and her initial excitement at Mrs. Nolt's offer was tinged with regret. She had grown to love everything about her life in Rocky River. But she knew deep down that she wanted more. She was lonely, and it seemed as though the man she had fallen in love with didn't feel the same way about her. Emma! Bethany ran down the veranda steps, her dark hair streaming out behind her. I haven't finished cooking dinner yet. Pa asked me to tell you that he needs your help with Coco for a few minutes. She hurried closer and offered to take Emma's basket. It's nothing to worry about. He's just fitting her with a new bridle and reckoned you'd like to help. You know how much Coco likes you. Emma smiled in spite of the confusion crowding her mind. Bethany was so different from the shy girl she had met on the day she'd arrived. She was already talking about asking Harriet if she might be able to work in the shop when Jacob started school, and Emma thought she was a credit to Gabe. Of course, I'm always happy to help. She looked in the barn and was surprised that Gabe wasn't there. Over here, Emma? His voice drifted toward her from the paddock, and she went round the edge of the barn. The sight which greeted her almost took her breath away. Coco stood proudly next to Gabe, her dappled coat gleaming in the evening sun. Her mane and tail had been plaited and then let loose, so the hair fell in soft waves, and there were meadow flowers woven into her head collar. The mare's ears flicked forward as she saw Emma approaching, and Gabe led her slowly forward. Coco, meet your new owner, Gabe said. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her. I took the liberty of cleaning her up, and if you want her, she's yours, Emma. She can live here with me, and I'll teach you to ride, like I promised. Emma's heart leaped with joy, and she ran her hand down the mare's neck, feeling the warmth of the evening sun on her coat. Oh, Gabe, she's beautiful, and you're so kind. Too kind. She looked up into Gabe's dark eyes and knew that she had to be honest with him. It's just, you don't want a horse after all? Gabe looked crestfallen. It's not that. Emma pulled Mrs. Nolt's letter from her skirt pocket. This came for me today. Mrs. Nolt is offering me the chance to take over her shop back in Wilmington. And is that what you want, to leave here? Gabe let go of Coco and took Emma's hands in his own, making her pulse quicken again. I don't know. I wasn't sure if there was anything for me to stay in Rocky River for. I'm not making a very good job of explaining why we're giving you Coco, Gabe said, holding her gaze. I'd like her to be a wedding present for you, Emma. I wanted to ask you to marry me the night of the storm, but I needed to give you time to think about everything I told you. I didn't want you to marry me out of pity. Pity? Never. Emma felt almost light-headed with joy as his words sank in. I felt a connection to you since the day I arrived, but I fought it because it felt wrong because of Walter dying. And for the first time in my life, I know that I'm in love with you, Gabe. I love you. So you'll marry me? Gabe picked her up and swung her around before setting her down again. He stroked her hair and then bent his head. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender and passionate and made time stand still. It's what I've prayed for weeks. Emma placed her hands on Gabe's cheeks and smiled up at him. You're the most wonderful, perfect man, Gabe, and I thank the Lord that our paths were brought together, even if we didn't understand why. Of course, as the new deputy mayor of Rocky River, I reckon Pastor Franklin might be able to fit us in for our wedding pretty soon, Gabe said, wrapping Emma in his arms. I don't have a gown to wear. So Harriet didn't show you the cream silk today, then? Gabe's voice was teasing as Emma gasped with surprise. The silk and lace that came today are for me? And Harriet and Anthony know about this? About us? Uh-huh. Gabe looked momentarily bashful. I figured that, seeing as you don't have your parents, I should ask Anthony and Harriet if they thought I stood a chance with you. They said yes. In fact, they told me they didn't know what I was waiting for and gave me their blessing. A sudden thought occurred to Emma. What about the fact that you're still married? I showed the pastor the letter Josephine left, as well as the lawyer in town. They said it was clear from what she'd said that she was freeing me to marry again. So there's no need to worry. Our wedding will be perfectly legitimate, just as I want it to be, with you as my wife. Can we come out yet, Pa? Bethany's voice behind them made Emma spin around, and her eyes filled with tears as she saw Bethany and Jonah peeking out from behind the barn. Jonah was holding a posy of flowers, and he ran toward Emma, holding them out. She said yes, Bethany, Gabe said, sounding happier than Emma had ever heard him. I've prayed for so long that you and Pa would get married, Bethany said, suddenly shy again. Can we call you Ma, Emma? I'd like that very much. Emma blinked back her tears of joy and held her arms open, pulling Bethany and Jonah into a hug. It would be an honor to be your Ma, Bethany. The three of you are very special, and I can't wait for us to spend the rest of our days together. I reckon it's time for us to have that special dinner now, don't you think? Gabe waited for Bethany to take Jonah back toward the cabin and turned to face Emma again. I think this is the happiest day of my life, he said. Emma rested her hands on his chest and nodded. It's the first of the happiest days of our lives, she murmured. And you don't mind being with a man who's only just getting used to being back into polite society again? Gabe asked with a grin. Emma laughed as they started walking back to the cabin. I reckon between Sheriff Jackson, Harriet, Anthony, and me, you never stood a chance of hiding away at the forge. As the sheriff said, Rocky River needs a good man like you. She glanced up at the man she loved and watched the shadows behind his eyes finally disappear. His memories from the past might come back now and again, but this time she would be there to care for him, and she knew they had a bright future to look forward to. Epilogue. Rocky River, Wyoming, 1882. Emma could hear the sound of the brass band playing in the park as she walked arm in arm with Gabe along the main street of Rocky River. They were making slow progress because so many of their friends and neighbors stopped them to say hello. The celebrations for the annual summer fair were in full swing. There would be horse racing later that afternoon and a small parade to give folks a chance to show off the best animals. I hope you're ready for judging the young stock, Emma said. Bethany has done a fine job with Coco. She glanced back toward the girl she now regarded as her daughter, who was leading Coco along the street. Bethany had been up before dawn to make the mare look beautiful in the hope of winning a prize, and her mane rippled and her coat gleamed. Emma smiled as she saw the two boys who had previously bullied Bethany run over and offer to help with holding Jonah's hand. It seemed that they had finally grown up a little and mended their ways. I can hardly believe my year as deputy mayor is coming to an end today. It's gone by so fast. Gabe's expression was amused as he looked into his wife's eyes. If it hadn't been for you, I never would have considered putting my name forward. Not that I blame you or anything. He joked. Not just me, surely? Emma said with a chuckle. It was Harriet and Anthony who put the idea into my head. I would never have been bold enough to suggest it otherwise, even though I knew you'd be perfect for it. I'm not sure about perfect, but I have enjoyed it. I always knew that the townsfolk were friendly when they came to the forge wanting me to make something or shoe their horses. But if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have thrown myself into doing more for the town like this. That's for sure. It seems folks don't care about how I look after all. Do you realize you don't touch your cheek anymore when you talk about your scars? Emma said. She felt a wave of contentment at how significant this was. It meant Gabe had finally put the past behind him and understood that his self-worth was about so much more than the way he looked. Folks are drawn to you because of your kind heart and the way you encourage others, she added. Now that you mention it, I barely even think about the scars anymore. I'm just grateful you didn't vanish back to Wilmington to take over Mrs. Knowlt's shop. As they reached the center of town, Emma saw that a crowd had started to gather. There were shouts of laughter and a general air of excitement because the new deputy mayor would soon be announced. She waved at Anthony and Harriet, who were standing outside their shop. Anthony had a brand new jacket over his arm, which he would shortly present to Mr. Charlton, a rancher from the other side of town, who would be taking over from Gabe as the new deputy mayor. "There's something I need to say to you," Gabe said quietly, "before all the festivities begin." Emma was struck by the sudden seriousness of his voice, and she stopped walking. "I want to thank you for everything that you have done for us," Gabe murmured. "I know. You said you believed in me that night of the storm, but I knew I couldn't ask you to become my wife until I believed in myself as well. Putting my name forward to be the deputy mayor was part of that, and I'm grateful that you never gave up on me." He lowered his head and brushed his lips tenderly on her cheek. "I could say the same about you," Emma said with a wry smile. "It was only once I came to Rocky River that I started to really understand what it meant to open my heart to the Lord's path. Thank goodness I did. Otherwise, I never might have fallen in love, and that would have been a terrible shame." "Howdy, Gabe, Emma," Mayor Grady said, tipping his hat as he hurried toward them. He shot a questioning look toward Gabe. "Are you ready to start the ceremony?" "I sure am." Gabe lifted his hat and smoothed his hair back, standing a little taller. He had been practicing his speech for days and was looking forward to handing over to George Charlton. "Before we start, I figured I should let you know that I'm thinking about standing down soon," Mayor Grady said in a low voice. "Sheriff Jackson and I were wondering whether you might like to take over from me and become the town's mayor. I've seen firsthand how folks respect you, and that goes a long way in these parts." "Did we hear you suggesting Gabe should become the new mayor?" Harriet asked, as she and Anthony joined them. "That's an excellent idea. It's just what Rocky River needs." Emma nodded happily. "I agree, Gabe. You've had so many good ideas for the town this last year, and it would give you a chance to see some of them come to fruition." Gabe couldn't hide his surprise, and he lifted his hands to indicate he didn't think it was a good idea. "Hold up a minute," he said with a grin. "Aren't you all forgetting something? My wife and I have a new baby who needs my attention." His eyes softened as he gazed down at his 2-month-old son, who was lying contentedly fast asleep in Emma's arms. "I'm not sure about taking on more when Harvey is so young." "Nonsense," Harriet said. "You know, Anthony and I are already looking forward to Emma bringing little Harvey into the shop on the 2 days she still works with us. And don't forget how wonderful Bethany is looking after him, too," Emma said. "Even Jonah is enjoying helping to take care of his little brother." Gabe grinned and rolled his eyes. "It sounds like you all have it figured out," he said with a wry smile. "I can see I'm going to have to get used to playing a bigger part in the town. It's a good thing I love it so much here. Rocky River will always be our home, so if you think I'd be good for the position, I guess I'd better give it some serious consideration." As Gabe followed Mayor Grady onto the platform where the ceremony was being held, Emma's heart filled with admiration and joy for her husband, and how much he had changed. She thought back to that fateful day when she had stood at the river's edge in Wilmington, and how her life could have taken a very different turn. She was grateful for all the challenges and tribulations that had brought them to today, because she knew that they had made her and Gabe stronger. The ceremony was short, and Emma took a moment to glance around at all the folks who were now their friends, laughing and nodding in agreement as Gabe spoke about the future of the town. She couldn't imagine living anywhere else, and Rocky River was a fine place to bring up their growing family. As George Charlton began his speech, Gabe returned to Emma's side and put his arm around her shoulders. "Isn't it funny how life works out?" he whispered, lowering his head. His breath tickled in her hair, and Emma shifted Harvey in her arms as he blinked awake. "I'd say it's worked out just fine," she murmured back with a smile. Her heart felt full, with gratitude for this good man by her side, for their baby in her arms, and for Bethany and Jonah. who she loved more than she could ever have imagined. She leaned closer to Gabe and silently thanked God for giving them the happy ever after she had always longed for. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler, with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.